Hey guys, tonight we venture into a world so distant and murky, you might feel like you're stumbling barefoot through the cold mud of medieval Europe. Picture this: the sun dipping low behind hills, fields growing shadowy, and a chill wind rustling through thatched roofs. You're standing on the edge of a small village, breathing the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. In this seemingly peaceful twilight, life feels deceptively calm. But don't get too cozy just yet, because tonight's journey through history might reveal a side of the medieval world you'd never expect. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not tell me down in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there? It's always fascinating seeing who's along for the ride. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born into a world that doesn't notice your arrival, a birth that occurs quietly in a hut at the edge of a medieval village, perhaps somewhere in what will one day be France, or Germany, or England. The specifics aren't important, and frankly, no one records them anyway. Instead, your story begins anonymously, marked only by the soft cries of your mother, the concerned whispers of neighbors, and the dim flicker of an oil lamp barely keeping the darkness at bay. You're born into poverty, or perhaps modest comfort, but your true fate, unbeknownst to you, is already casting long shadows. In this uncertain world, slavery is a reality as solid and undeniable as the stone walls of the distant castle looming over your village. While today we might like to imagine slavery as strictly ancient or distant, medieval Europe had its own brand of human bondage, quietly thriving, rarely discussed in popular culture, yet deeply woven into the fabric of everyday life. It's not something you read about in fairy tales or see depicted in festive medieval reenactments. But trust me, your reality tonight is far from jousts, knights in shining armor, or damsels awaiting rescue. You're on the ground, feet dirty, stomach empty, and future uncertain. Your family, like many others, hovers precariously above the abyss of slavery, their freedom often dependent on sheer luck or circumstance. One failed harvest, one lost battle, or a single unfortunate encounter on a lonely road could change everything. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants fully understood the risks they faced daily, or if, like modern people ignoring storm warnings, they hoped trouble would simply pass them by. Either way, your family goes about life with cautious optimism, tilling fields, herding sheep, and attending market days, ever mindful but never fully safe. Childhood for you means learning quickly the invisible boundaries that define freedom. You're warned from a young age not to stray far from home, especially at dusk. There's whispered talk among adults about strangers, slave traders prowling distant roads, soldiers on patrol looking for easy targets, or desperate men selling their neighbors to stave off starvation. This cautionary atmosphere is both grim and oddly mundane, like warnings from modern parents about not talking to strangers. Only here, the stakes are much higher, and no one ever puts them on a fridge magnet. In medieval Europe, slavery is less formalized than in ancient Rome or Greece, yet pervasive enough to affect nearly every facet of society. People slip into slavery through various routes, captured in raids, sold by impoverished relatives, or enslaved as prisoners of war. But there's a murky side to this history, too. Occasionally, someone ends up in chains through sheer bad luck or deceit, a lost traveler mistaken for a runaway slave, or an unlucky merchant ambushed on a quiet forest path. Freedom can vanish in a heartbeat, leaving individuals to grapple with sudden, crushing uncertainty. The identity of slaves in medieval Europe isn't always obvious. While images today might conjure shackled figures or harshly controlled plantations, medieval slavery is often hidden in plain sight, quietly blending into everyday routines. Domestic slaves might sleep near hearths, tend gardens, cook meals, or serve at tables without drawing much attention. Unlike the glaring, institutional slavery familiar from later periods, medieval slaves frequently exist in the shadows, noticed but unremarked, silently present, and quietly essential. This invisibility makes it challenging to trace the personal histories of medieval slaves. Official records rarely bothered with them. Chroniclers, busy writing about kings, saints, and battles, saw little reason to record the lives of nameless laborers, unless they were involved in something scandalous or extraordinary. And so, countless lives slipped silently into oblivion, unrecorded and unnoticed. It's an odd irony. The very people whose labor quietly upheld society are often erased from historical memory. But glimpses remain, enough fragments and shadows for historians to piece together some image of this overlooked world. Medieval chronicles occasionally mention slave raids, market prices, or individuals sold alongside livestock and grain. Church documents hint at spiritual anxieties over slavery, detailing debates about whether enslaving fellow Christians was sinful or acceptable, and whether baptism could free an individual from bondage. Legal texts reflect a confusing web of rights, restrictions, and vague obligations toward slaves, highlighting the uneasy coexistence of freedom and servitude in medieval minds. One curious fact buried in medieval documents is the surprising variety of names given to slaves. In various places and periods, they were called serfs, thralls, or villeins, each term reflecting subtle distinctions in status or conditions of servitude. While modern ears might treat these terms interchangeably, medieval society recognized nuances. A serf typically had certain rights tied to land, though limited, whereas a thrall might be more purely property, with fewer protections. A villain often occupied a gray area, bound to land and lord, but occasionally able to buy freedom or achieve semi-independence through service or skill. Your medieval existence tonight lies somewhere within these shifting categories. Perhaps you're lucky, born to a serf family with limited freedoms, bound to a lord but not completely property. Perhaps you're less fortunate, already considered property from birth, your life trajectory shaped entirely by others. Either way, your future isn't fully yours. It hangs, suspended between chance, choice, and circumstance. Tonight, we're only at the beginning of your medieval journey, quietly weaving through dim rooms, smoky hearths, and shadowed fields. From here, life will twist and turn unpredictably, echoing softly through the centuries. It's a humbling thought, your small life, so easily forgotten, subtly contributing to a much larger historical canvas. But that's tomorrow's concern. For now, rest softly in your uncertain world, wrapped gently in darkness. Tomorrow's dawn will come soon enough, bringing new worries, new duties, and perhaps new dreams. Life drifts onward, slowly, predictably, until suddenly it doesn't. One morning you wake up to find your village unnaturally quiet. The birds have ceased their usual chatter, and even the livestock seems hesitant to stir. Your skin prickles uneasily, sensing the subtle tension crackling through the air. It's a familiar unease in medieval Europe, whispered about by elders at night. The threat of raids, sudden attacks, and the quiet, lurking danger of losing everything. The day begins deceptively peaceful, almost painfully ordinary. You gather wood, help mend fences, perhaps chase a wandering sheep back toward the fold. Neighbors nod in greeting, but their eyes betray worry. Something feels off, though no one dares voice it aloud. Rumors swirl quietly. War between rival lords, tensions at the border, displaced soldiers roaming countryside roads. But there's always some rumor of trouble, isn't there? Your village has learned to live under such shadows, to exist quietly beneath the threat, never quite believing danger could truly find its way here. And then, of course, it does. A faint rumbling echoes across distant hills, growing steadily louder. You pause, ears straining, and glance around to see others frozen mid-task, faces pale with recognition. These aren't thunderclouds, and this is no harmless group of travelers. Soon enough, shapes appear on the horizon, mounted figures moving swiftly and silently across the open fields, dark silhouettes against the early sky. Raiders. soldiers, slave hunters. You and your neighbors scatter desperately, but chaos erupts too quickly. Riders flood into the village, horses kicking up clouds of dirt, screams shattering the morning air. You're swept into frantic motion, heart pounding, legs pumping, running without direction or thought. The panic feels almost surreal, like a nightmare from which you can't awaken. You're caught between disbelief and terror, your only instinct survival. But there's nowhere truly safe to run. Before you know it, you're seized roughly, dragged toward the center of the village along with friends, relatives, and neighbors. The sight of familiar faces twisted in fear brings a sickening ache to your chest. You're lined up roughly, hands bound, your heartbeat drumming painfully in your ears as you wait, breath shallow, unsure what comes next. In medieval Europe, war wasn't always about conquest alone. Battles and skirmishes often had a practical, grim undercurrent, capturing people, livestock, or goods that could be easily sold or traded. Slavery became one of the spoils of war, providing profit as surely as sacks of grain or stolen silver. Your village, small and insignificant though it may have seemed, has just become a hunting ground. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers fully understood how vulnerable they were, or if they simply chose to ignore threats until it was too late. Perhaps the inevitability of tragedy made it easier not to think about it all, living each day as if danger was always somewhere else, always someone else's story. Yet now, suddenly, that distant tragedy is yours. The raiders are ruthless but practical, quickly sorting villagers based on age, strength, and health. Young and strong are valuable, destined for hard labor or domestic service. Those too old or frail might be left behind, though not always unharmed. You glance desperately at faces you've known since childhood, each expression marked by terror, resignation, or defiance. It's strange how clearly you notice little details. The familiar pattern of your neighbor's shawl, the way sunlight glances off muddy hair, or the trembling breath of someone beside you. Everything feels sharply real, brutally vivid. Soon you're being herded forward, driven like cattle onto paths you've walked 1,000 times before, now unrecognizable beneath your feet. Your captors speak in languages or dialects unfamiliar to your ears. Their expressions are unreadable, stern, bored, indifferent. To them, you and your neighbors are commodities, no different than cattle or sheep. There's little cruelty in their eyes, merely cold practicality, which somehow makes it all worse. These sudden captures weren't always random acts by lawless bandits. Sometimes local lords actively encouraged raids against rivals to weaken enemies or gather valuable resources. Occasionally, even the church might look the other way, conveniently ignoring the enslavement of certain groups, especially those seen as outsiders or enemies. The morality of medieval Europe was layered, complicated, rarely fitting neatly into today's notions of right or wrong. Your captors push you forward along muddy paths, the landscape shifting slowly as your home fades from view. The journey will be long and harsh, stretching days or even weeks. It's impossible to fully grasp what this new life means, though dread settles like a stone in your stomach. Some captives cry quietly, others move silently, numbly accepting whatever fate awaits them. You float somewhere in between, your mind overwhelmed, your senses dulled. These journeys weren't rare in medieval times. Slave routes crisscrossed the continent, connecting towns, villages, and distant markets. Captured villagers traveled these paths regularly, though their footsteps are invisible to modern eyes, hidden beneath centuries of dust and grass. Your path tonight winds through woods you once played in as a child, through fields you once harvested. These familiar sights now feel foreign, alien, tinged with sadness. And the bitter irony. Your captors are likely not so different from you, ordinary people doing what they must to survive. Medieval society rarely offered clear choices between good and evil. For every ruthless raider, there was often a desperate family needing food, or a soldier following orders. It's a complicated reality, uncomfortable but true, blurring distinctions between victim and oppressor in ways modern minds might struggle to grasp. As the day stretches on, your captors offer little rest or comfort. Food, when provided, is sparse. Dry bread, thin soup, just enough to keep you moving. Nights offer no shelter beyond crude makeshift campsites beneath stars that feel strangely indifferent. You huddle closely with your fellow captives, seeking warmth and reassurance in whispers and soft cries. Sleep comes reluctantly, troubled by dreams of home and memories now painfully distant. Yet humans are remarkably resilient. Even in these desperate circumstances, small kindnesses quietly emerge. A neighbor shares a crust of bread. A stranger helps you up after stumbling. Someone quietly hums a comforting tune in the dark. These small acts remind you that humanity endures, even amid cruelty and despair. Historians might miss these quiet gestures, but they matter immensely to you tonight, each tiny kindness a lifeline in darkness. Still, your future remains painfully uncertain. Slavery in medieval Europe wasn't one uniform experience. It varied widely, influenced by geography, economics, and simple chance. Perhaps you'll end up laboring in distant fields, serving in a wealthy household, or worse. Perhaps you'll find unexpected opportunities, small moments of dignity or kindness. History rarely offers clear predictions, only scattered clues. For now, you're simply carried along by fate, pushed onward through unknown landscapes toward an unknown destination. All around you, the quiet breathing of your fellow captives blends into a sorrowful lullaby, soft whispers beneath the night sky, each voice a testament to human endurance and vulnerability. Tonight, your journey is just beginning, your world shrinking to the slow, relentless shuffle of feet and the uncertain promise of tomorrow. Sleep comes eventually, a mercy, allowing you temporary escape into dreams that blur memories with wishes, reality with hope. Tomorrow will come soon enough, bringing new struggles, new uncertainties, new challenges. But for now, rest quietly in this fleeting stillness. Tomorrow is another story, another journey, waiting patiently beyond the edge of dreams. Your feet grow numb as the march continues, day after day. Dust coats your skin, grit fills your mouth, and the ache in your bones settles into a weary rhythm you begin to accept as normal. Slowly, inevitably, you start to adapt to the grim routine of captivity. Sleep comes in fragmented bursts, interrupted by harsh whispers or the restless shuffling of your companions. Meals remain scarce. A handful of grain, a scrap of dry meat, water that tastes faintly metallic. But you savor each bite gratefully, learning quickly how to survive on very little. The landscape around you changes subtly with every passing hour. Fields dotted with sheep turn to dense, whispering forests. Narrow mountain passes widen into sprawling river valleys. Medieval Europe, in all its rugged and diverse beauty, passes you by without fanfare or celebration. There's no sightseeing here, just endless trudging, each weary step carrying you further from everything familiar, deeper into an unknown, uncertain future. You begin noticing details you might have overlooked before captivity sharpened your senses. Birdsong at dawn, crisp morning air, the scent of wild herbs growing along roadsides. All these become precious fragments of comfort, fleeting reminders that beauty still exists in your narrowed world. There's an odd, bitter sweetness in these discoveries, small signs of life's resilience amidst harsh conditions. Sometimes your captors allow brief pauses for rest, usually in shaded groves or along riverbanks. Here, you're permitted a momentary reprieve to stretch tired muscles, sip cool water, or simply breathe deeply and appreciate the silence. Occasionally, captives whisper together, exchanging scraps of information, small bits of hope, or quiet jokes to ease tension. You find yourself clinging tightly to these fragile human interactions, tiny lifelines anchoring you amid chaos. Historians still argue whether medieval slaves fully comprehended their surroundings during these forced marches, or if exhaustion and fear overshadowed everything. Did captives recognize landmarks, silently mapping their route back home? Or did they become too numb, too weary, merely focusing on the next step, next meal, next breath? Tonight, your experience lies somewhere between these extremes. You're aware enough to register each landmark, curiously shaped trees, the way sunlight filters through leaves. But exhaustion keeps the bigger picture fuzzy, distant, unreal. It's hard not to wonder about your captors as the days unfold. Who are these people steering you relentlessly forward? They're soldiers or hired mercenaries, perhaps desperate peasants turned slave traders for quick profit. They speak sparingly, rarely offering clues about their identities or intentions. Yet, watching carefully, you glimpse occasional signs of their humanity. One man gently feeding his horse, another absently humming an old tune. You realize they're not purely monsters, though their actions are monstrous. Instead, they're products of their time, caught within medieval Europe's complicated morality, capable of cruelty and compassion alike. One fringe historical tidbit emerges along these journeys, rarely discussed in textbooks. Sometimes captors themselves fell victim to slavery. Raiders defeated by rivals could swiftly find themselves bound in chains, reversing roles dramatically overnight. This grim irony underscores the unpredictable, ruthless nature of medieval society, where fortunes could shift abruptly, turning captors into captives, oppressors into victims. As your journey progresses, some fellow captives falter. Older villagers struggle most, their steps growing labored, their breathing ragged. Occasionally, someone collapses, unable to continue. Your captors face difficult choices. Leave them behind, losing potential profit, or delay everyone, risking discovery or escape attempts. Usually the decision is swift and harsh. Weak captives are abandoned, left to fate or mercy of passing travelers. The rest continue onward, eyes averted, hearts heavy with unspoken grief. Survival becomes increasingly brutal, a daily battle against despair. Yet amid hardship, strange bonds begin forming among your group. Shared suffering creates unexpected camaraderie. Former neighbors become protectors, strangers become friends. Small kindnesses bloom quietly. Someone offers encouragement, another shares a precious sip of water. A whispered joke brings faint smiles to weary faces. Historians often overlook these subtle human connections forged under extreme duress. Yet tonight they sustain you, helping you navigate the bleak unknown. Your captors push the pace, eager to reach distant markets quickly. Medieval slave routes weren't mere wandering paths, but organized networks linking remote villages, bustling towns, and bustling market centers. These routes crisscrossed Europe, invisible yet vital arteries sustaining an economy quietly dependent on forced labor. As your captors hurry you onward, they're calculating profits and risks, anxious to complete their grim transactions swiftly. Eventually, the landscape around you shifts dramatically. Wide-open countryside narrows into busy trade routes lined with travelers, merchants, and farmers heading to distant towns. Fear mingles with hope inside your chest. Perhaps you'll find opportunity to escape, or at least pass unnoticed by strangers who might pity your plight. But medieval Europe was notoriously indifferent to slave caravans. Passers-by glance briefly, expressions blank or vaguely curious, then swiftly turn away, unwilling or unable to intervene. Your march enters larger towns, and suddenly you're surrounded by noise, chaos, and life. Cobblestone streets ring loudly beneath your feet, buildings tower imposingly overhead. Townsfolk hurry about their lives, buying produce, gossiping at street corners, children chasing each other through busy markets. Your group passes almost unnoticed, blending quietly into this bustling backdrop, yet feeling painfully exposed. Each curious glance stings, reminding you sharply of lost freedom and dignity. In these towns, you glimpse other slave groups, similarly weary and resigned, each silently acknowledging shared suffering with tired eyes. Slavery feels shockingly commonplace here, ordinary, expected, disturbingly normal. Historians still debate how much medieval townspeople understood slavery's prevalence, or if they chose convenient ignorance, turning blind eyes to injustice occurring openly beneath their noses. Brief market stops become regular features of your journey, allowing captors quick opportunities for trade or replenishment. Here, local merchants sell food, clothing, or tools needed for continuing onward. You watch quietly, curious despite exhaustion. Perhaps someday these merchants or their customers will face similar fates, caught up in medieval Europe's shifting tides. Fate feels arbitrary, fickle, unpredictable, offering wealth or misery without explanation or reason. The final stages of your journey become particularly brutal. Exhaustion deepens, blisters form painfully beneath swollen feet, hunger gnaws constantly at your stomach. But somehow, impossibly, you endure. Historians rarely celebrate such quiet resilience, preferring grand battles or noble heroics, but your persistence tonight deserves quiet recognition. Step by weary step, breath by labored breath, you persist, carrying yourself bravely through darkness, uncertain yet determined. At last, after days or weeks lost to weary marching, your captors announce final arrival. The slave market awaits, your destination grimly certain. Emotions swirl chaotically inside your chest. Fear, dread, resignation, even faint curiosity. You've endured unimaginable hardship, survived desperate conditions, but what comes next remains unknown, terrifyingly uncertain. Still, one thought brings small comfort. You made it this far. You've endured. Tonight, sleep comes restlessly beneath indifferent stars, your weary body grateful for temporary stillness, your mind already preparing anxiously for tomorrow's challenges. Your journey isn't over, not by far. But for now, rest quietly, knowing you've faced adversity with courage, dignity, and quiet strength. Tomorrow awaits patiently beyond sleep's edge, promising new trials, new uncertainties, new chances. But tonight, rest gently in this fleeting stillness, and let the world fade softly around you. The first thing that strikes you when entering the slave market is the noise. Voices raised in rough bargaining, livestock lowing nervously, the metallic clang of chains, and the rhythmic shuffle of countless weary feet. Dust hangs thickly in the air, catching sunlight streaming down through gaps between crowded buildings. For a moment, you pause, overwhelmed by the intensity of this unfamiliar scene, before a rough shove jolts you forward, reminding you sharply of your place in this bustling chaos. Your captors hurry your group into the marketplace, steering you toward an open square already busy with activity. Crowds press in on every side, a dizzying mix of traders, farmers, merchants, soldiers, and curious onlookers jostling for space. A wooden platform dominates the center of the square, worn smooth from years of use, a silent testament to the countless lives quietly traded here, lost beneath layers of grime and faded footprints. This place has no grandeur, no polished marble columns or majestic arches like markets from ancient Rome. Medieval slave markets are practical, gritty affairs, stripped of ceremony or pretension. They blend into ordinary street scenes, next to fishmongers, blacksmiths, and cobblers, just another practical corner of daily medieval life. It's jarring, uncomfortable, even surreal to realize human beings are bought and sold alongside sacks of grain or bundles of firewood, their value discussed in the same breath as livestock or tools. Your captors line you up roughly, checking bonds, and briefly inspecting your condition. Buyers begin drifting forward, eyes calculating, expressions indifferent. Historians still debate how openly medieval slave markets operated, and whether average townsfolk viewed these transactions as morally troubling or simply routine aspects of commerce. Judging from the blank or mildly curious faces around you, most seem disturbingly unfazed. One by one, captives step onto the wooden platform, their worth debated briskly by buyers. Prices are called out bluntly, counteroffers shouted loudly, deals sealed quickly. There's no sentimentality here, no acknowledgement of humanity, just swift, efficient commerce. Occasionally, arguments erupt briefly over price or condition, quickly settled with curt words or exchanged coins. The market moves swiftly, brutally efficient, leaving little room for dignity or reflection. While waiting your turn, you observe the diverse group of potential buyers. Wealthy merchants examine potential domestic slaves, searching carefully for signs of skill or obedience. Farmers eye strong, able-bodied captives suited to heavy fieldwork. A few well-dressed noblemen linger near the edges, selecting carefully among those who seem healthiest or most attractive, destined for private service or entertainment. You're painfully aware of being judged solely on physical appearance and perceived usefulness, your value reduced brutally to mere practicality. Among the buyers, an odd historical fact emerges quietly. Sometimes monasteries and churches purchased slaves as well, using them for labor or service within their religious communities. This strange reality seems incongruous, even uncomfortable. How could institutions dedicated to spiritual purity participate openly in slavery's grim commerce? Yet medieval morality was complex, capable of rationalizing contradictions modern minds find troubling. Your captors pull you forward at last, guiding you onto the worn wooden stage. Standing here feels painfully exposed, every flaw magnified, every weakness scrutinized. Buyers drift closer, assessing carefully. You can feel their calculating gazes, indifferent, detached, considering age, strength, health, and potential profitability. It's a deeply uncomfortable feeling, reducing your existence entirely to practical terms, stripping away dignity and humanity. Historians often highlight how medieval slave markets were pragmatic affairs, lacking the theatrical cruelty sometimes depicted in popular culture. Violence was usually avoided. Injuries would lower a slave's price. Instead, the market focused purely on economics, efficient transactions, and practical negotiations. Yet this cold pragmatism feels no less cruel, perhaps even more deeply unsettling. Indifference, after all, can be far harsher than outright malice. Buyers occasionally ask blunt questions about your origin, health, and skills. Your captors answer tersely, providing minimal detail, just enough information to secure the best price. You're treated almost as livestock, examined closely, touched roughly, your humanity casually disregarded. This treatment isn't overtly cruel. Rather, it's chillingly indifferent, as if you're an object, not a living person. It stings deeply, leaving a quiet ache of humiliation. Prices are debated loudly, offers shouted, and eventually your captors accept a deal. Coins change hands briskly, your fate sealed in moments. This quick, cold exchange feels surreal, your entire future determined in a heartbeat, your life trajectory altered by a simple exchange of silver. It's a stark reminder of how swiftly medieval lives could shift from freedom to captivity, from security to uncertainty. Once sold, you're quickly shuffled aside, your new owner leading you away without ceremony. Your captors fade quickly from view, vanishing into the crowded market without a backward glance. Historians rarely discuss what happened afterward to medieval slave traders, their lives largely lost to history. They were practical opportunists, operating on society's fringes, their actions troubling yet tolerated within medieval Europe's complicated morality. Your new owner briefly instructs you, outlining expectations or duties. Perhaps you'll labor in fields, perform domestic chores, or provide skilled services. Your destination remains uncertain, details vague, your future still painfully unknown. Yet tonight, as your new life begins quietly amid this bustling chaos, you cling desperately to resilience and hope. Humans are remarkably adaptable, capable of enduring immense hardship. You've survived capture, marched countless weary miles, endured humiliation. Surely you can survive whatever comes next. Quiet whispers among other newly sold slaves remind you you're not alone. Shared glances communicate empathy, understanding, and quiet encouragement. Small kindnesses emerge even here, reminding you gently of humanity's resilience. It's a comforting realization amid cruelty, a gentle reassurance that your spirit remains intact, quietly defiant despite harsh circumstances. Finally, as darkness approaches, the market quiets slowly. Buyers disperse, goods packed away, voices fading into silence. You sit quietly, weary body grateful for rest, mind anxiously considering tomorrow. Your new life stretches ahead, uncertain, daunting, yet undeniably yours. Historians often miss these quiet moments after markets closed, small pauses when captives reflected silently, accepting their altered fates, quietly preparing for whatever came next. Tonight, rest comes reluctantly beneath distant stars, body exhausted yet mind racing. Medieval slavery remains a shadowed, uncomfortable chapter of history, filled with complicated morality, quiet cruelty, and surprising resilience. Yet you're here, enduring quietly, carrying dignity forward bravely into uncertain darkness. Tomorrow waits patiently beyond dreams' edges, bringing new challenges, new struggles, perhaps even small moments of unexpected kindness. But for now, rest gently in fleeting stillness, holding tightly to quiet hope, courage softly whispering reassurance in your heart. Sleep quietly tonight, letting darkness soften memories of harsh marketplaces, indifferent gazes, and uncertain futures. You've survived another difficult chapter, courageously resilient, quietly defiant. Tomorrow will come soon enough, patiently waiting beyond sleep, promising new possibilities, new uncertainties, new chances. But tonight, simply rest. Morning creeps softly into your new surroundings, your first dawn as someone else's property. You're startled awake by unfamiliar sounds, muffled footsteps, creaking floorboards, distant murmurs of voices issuing instructions. For a brief moment, you imagine yourself safely back home, wrapped in blankets, listening to your family stirring gently in the early hours. But reality returns swiftly, pulling you into this unfamiliar place, reminding you with quiet firmness that the life you knew is gone. You sit up slowly, taking in your surroundings. You're lodged in modest quarters near a large manor house, perhaps in a stable converted hastily into sleeping quarters or a cramped chamber within a servant's wing. The air smells faintly of straw, mildew, and something else, perhaps resignation. Light trickles through a narrow, dusty window, illuminating scattered straw bedding, a chipped clay bowl, and rough wooden walls that whisper stories of countless others who have occupied this space before you. Historians often debate what life truly felt like for domestic slaves in medieval households, acknowledging it varied widely, from brutal oppression in some houses to unexpected gentleness in others. Tonight, your experience teeters uncertainly somewhere in the middle, offering neither outright cruelty nor particular kindness, merely quiet indifference punctuated occasionally by sharp reminders of your status. You're called forth early, ushered briskly into the bustling manor. The contrast between your stark quarters and the house's polished interior shocks you briefly. Walls adorned with bright tapestries, polished wooden floors gleaming in morning sunlight, tables piled with fruit, fresh bread, and meats. Your stomach growls softly, reminding you how sparse your recent meals have been. Your eyes linger hungrily on food you're unlikely to taste, at least not soon, not unless scraps are generously offered. Your duties begin immediately. There's no gentle introduction, no careful explanations. Medieval domestic slaves typically learned on the job, hurriedly taught basic tasks and expected to quickly adapt. You might find yourself tasked with menial chores like scrubbing floors, carrying water, fetching firewood, or helping prepare meals. Perhaps your hands grow sore quickly, unused to the rough labor, but complaining achieves nothing. Instead, you learn swiftly to work quietly, unnoticed, understanding that invisibility often offers its own safety. The household staff you encounter vary significantly in temperament. Some servants treat you indifferently, preoccupied by their own tasks, unwilling or unable to spare sympathy. Others offer quiet encouragement or small kindnesses, a whispered instruction, a gentle correction, even occasional shared smiles. Historians sometimes overlook the nuanced interactions among household servants and slaves, forgetting the quiet complexities of human relationships that form even within oppressive circumstances. Throughout your first day, you're keenly aware of the manor's owner, perhaps a minor noble or wealthy merchant whose demeanor shapes your entire existence. Medieval slave owners varied dramatically, from callous oppressors to relatively compassionate masters who regarded slaves more as household members than property. You're uncertain yet where your owner falls on this troubling spectrum. For now, you simply keep your head down, fulfilling tasks quietly, hoping to avoid notice entirely. Yet glimpses of your master's daily routine provide fascinating, if uncomfortable, insight. You're present in rooms normally closed to outsiders, privy to whispered conversations, heated arguments, casual jokes shared among nobles who disregard your silent presence entirely. Ironically, your invisibility grants you unexpected insight into their lives, knowledge historians today piece together painstakingly from scattered documents. Your experience tonight quietly illuminates medieval household dynamics far more vividly than official records ever could. One quirky historical detail emerges here. Medieval households sometimes kept slaves specifically trained for unusual or specialized roles, such as personal grooming attendants skilled in medieval beauty practices, some rather bizarre, involving concoctions of eggs, wine, and even pigeon droppings for facial care. You quietly hope your duties remain safely mundane. Scrubbing floors suddenly seems preferable to concocting pigeon-based skincare potions. Mealtimes offer brief glimpses into household hierarchy. You watch discreetly from kitchen doorways as your master dines leisurely at polished tables piled with roast meats, fresh breads, cheeses, and fruits, served attentively by domestic servants. Your stomach twists hungrily, envying their casual abundance. Yet occasionally, after meals, kitchen staff quietly share leftover scraps, small generosity offering momentary respite from hunger, quietly reinforcing subtle bonds forming slowly among servants and slaves alike. Nightfall returns quietly, offering brief rest after your first exhausting day. Back in your humble quarters, surrounded by rough walls and scattered straw, you finally pause, exhaustion sinking into every muscle. Sleep comes swiftly, mercifully granting temporary escape from weary reality. Dreams tonight mingle memories from your past life with scenes of today's experiences, blurring lines between freedom and captivity, yesterday and today, hope and uncertainty. Days settle quickly into predictable routines, each morning spent hurriedly performing chores, afternoons passing in quiet drudgery, evenings marked by brief moments of rest and quiet reflection. Gradually, you find yourself adapting surprisingly well. Humans, after all, possess remarkable resilience. Medieval slaves often developed subtle coping strategies, seeking solace in quiet prayers, whispered conversations, or small acts of kindness and rebellion. Tonight, you're quietly discovering your own methods for enduring hardship with quiet dignity. One ongoing historical debate involves whether medieval household slaves had meaningful opportunities for escape or freedom. While many undoubtedly endured lives confined within invisible yet impenetrable boundaries, occasional records suggest daring escapes, quiet rebellions, or even opportunities to buy freedom through diligent service or generous masters. Your mind occasionally drifts toward these possibilities, cautiously hopeful yet realistic enough to understand escape or freedom remain distant dreams tonight. Slowly, despite oppressive circumstances, you discover quiet spaces for small comforts. You learn which household servants are most approachable, exchanging quiet nods or whispered conversations in spare moments. Perhaps you find solace in mundane routines, rhythmic scrubbing of floors, chopping vegetables, carrying water, tasks offering quiet moments for reflection or daydreaming. Humans adapt remarkably well, finding dignity even within hardship, quietly defiant against oppression. Tonight, as your days quietly become weeks, you settle gradually into this strange new reality. Your medieval household, with all its complexities, contradictions, and subtle hierarchies, becomes oddly familiar. You remain painfully aware of your captivity, yet find small, quiet dignity amidst hardship. Tonight, you quietly recognize resilience within yourself, strength previously untested, emerging now subtly, gently, reminding you of your humanity, your quiet bravery. Sleep returns quietly, softly enveloping you in temporary peace. Medieval domestic slavery remains a shadowed chapter, quietly uncomfortable yet undeniably human. Historians often overlook subtle complexities, small kindnesses, quiet rebellions, whispered dreams. But tonight, you quietly embody them, surviving bravely, courageously resilient amidst quiet oppression. Tomorrow waits patiently, promising familiar routines, subtle challenges, perhaps unexpected opportunities. But tonight, simply rest quietly beneath comforting darkness. Let sleep soften harsh realities, briefly easing weary burdens, offering quiet reassurance that dignity remains intact, courage resilient, hope alive. Rest now, quietly defiant, courage whispering softly inside your heart. Tomorrow will arrive soon enough, waiting patiently beyond dreams, offering new uncertainties, new possibilities, new quiet moments for strength. But tonight, rest gently in quiet stillness, resilience comforting softly, courage whispering reassurance beneath peaceful darkness. Sleep quietly now, tomorrow waits. The fields stretch out before you like an ocean of green and brown, broken only by distant tree lines and the slow sweep of the horizon. The sun hasn't even fully risen yet, but you're already out here, bent over in the morning dew, hands raw, back aching, eyes still gritty with sleep. This is your new life, far from the quiet drudgery of domestic work. The manor has decided you're better suited to field labor, and now your days revolve around the relentless rhythms of soil, crop, and weather. Working the land is different. There's no polished wood underfoot or embroidered tapestries brushing your shoulders. Instead, there's mud clinging to your boots, rough tools biting into your palms, and the ever-present weight of silence broken only by the occasional grunt or barked instruction. Here, everything is effort, lifting, digging, hoeing, reaping. And when you're not moving fast enough, there's always someone watching, someone reminding you that your time doesn't belong to you anymore. Medieval field slaves worked long hours, often sunrise to sunset with little pause. And if the manor demanded more, say during harvest season, those hours stretched even longer. Meals, whenever the overseer said so. Water breaks, a luxury on a good day. You learn quickly to ration your strength, to make peace with hunger, and to find your own pace within the endless repetition. The work is brutally physical. Your hands develop blisters, then calluses. Your back aches every night, a deep, burning throb that refuses to fade even in sleep. But you endure. Everyone out here does. The other field workers, some slaves, some just poor peasants barely freer than you, work beside you with quiet focus, their faces unreadable, their hands as worn as the tools they hold. There's little talking. In this space, silence is more practical than conversation. It conserves energy. But despite the monotony and pain, you begin to notice the rhythm, the way your body slowly learns the motions, the way each day blends into the next like waves in a long, endless tide. Historians often gloss over this aspect of medieval slavery, the sheer physical toll of agricultural labor, and the mental discipline it required to endure it, day after relentless day. Occasionally, your overseer, usually a man from the village, someone promoted not for kindness but for obedience, passes among the rows, watching, correcting, sometimes snapping a switch against your legs if you're deemed too slow. His authority isn't based on strength, but on his ability to make you feel small. And yet, when no one's watching, you sometimes catch glimpses of weariness in his eyes too. Power in this world is a fragile thing, borrowed, conditional, always at risk of reversal. Interestingly, not all agricultural slaves in medieval Europe were treated identically. Some lords, particularly in more remote regions, relied heavily on their slaves' knowledge of the land and seasons. They knew that abusing their workforce too harshly could lead to poor harvests. So in some cases, though not all slaves had a kind of rough, transactional respect, you were useful, and that utility offered a sliver of protection. It wasn't dignity, not exactly, but it was something. A fringe historical tidbit you might find surprising. In certain regions, especially parts of medieval Eastern Europe, agricultural slaves were sometimes allowed to manage small plots of land for themselves, on the condition they continued to fulfill their work quotas. These mini-plots gave slaves the faintest illusion of autonomy, and for some, even allowed them to grow enough extra food to trade or store. But this arrangement was precarious, easily revoked, and served more to benefit the lord than the laborer. As the weeks stretch into months, you begin to read the sky like a book. You know when rain is coming by the smell in the air. You can tell if the soil is too wet or too dry just by how it feels under your feet. You know the exact weight of a sickle in your hand, the way to angle it just right to spare your wrist. These aren't the skills you dreamed of having, perhaps, but they're yours now. Hard-won, bone-deep, and quietly vital. And in the quiet spaces, those fleeting moments between tasks, you begin to notice the beauty that still clings to the edges of this hard life. A burst of wildflowers growing at the edge of a field. The way sunlight turns a golden wheat crop into something that looks like fire. A hawk circling overhead, so high it looks like a speck of ash caught on a breeze. These things don't make the work easier, but they remind you that the world still holds softness, even here. There are dangers too. Injuries happen often. A slip with a scythe, a stumble into a ditch, a poorly tied bundle causing a back strain that won't heal right. Medical care is minimal, usually limited to folk remedies or the occasional attention of an overworked village herbalist. If you're lucky, someone ties a poultice to your wound and tells you to rest. If you're not, you work through the pain, or someone else replaces you. Then there are the seasons. Summer bakes the fields dry, your skin sunburnt and cracked. Winter turns the ground to iron, and even simple tasks become grueling. Rain means mud that swallows your boots and makes every step feel like dragging your feet through quicksand. You learn to dress in layers, to stuff rags in your shoes, to wrap your hands when gloves wear out. You learn to survive simply and steadily. And there's something else, an undercurrent beneath the drudgery. A quiet pride. Not in the system that enslaves you, not in the people who own your time and your sweat, but in the work itself. In the fact that the field you tilled yesterday now sprouts clean rows of green. That the wheat you scythed with aching arms will feed dozens. That your hands, your effort, keep something alive. Historians sometimes miss this, that even in bondage, people found meaning. Not always, not every day, but sometimes. Still, not everything is peaceful. There are whispers among the workers, stories of small rebellions, tools gone missing, food stores pilfered, mysterious delays in work that no one can quite explain. Historians still argue whether these quiet acts of resistance were intentional sabotage or just signs of fatigue and human error. But you see the way someone looks after pretending to trip and spill a bucket of seed. You hear the tone in their voice when they offer a shrug and say, "Just an accident." These aren't revolutions. They're survival tactics. Occasionally, a new face appears in the fields, someone transferred from another estate or sold or punished. Their eyes are wide, their movements unsure, but within days they fall into the rhythm too. No one explains things out loud. You all teach through motion, through quiet example, through silent understanding. That's how it works here. Words aren't always safe. As the sun dips low one evening, painting the fields in bruised oranges and soft purples, you pause for a breath. Your arms hang heavy at your sides, your face streaked with dirt and sweat. But you're standing. You made it through another day. And that, in this world, is no small thing. You return to your quarters quietly, sore but steady, greeted by others with tired nods. You share a thin stew, a crust of bread. Maybe someone hums a tune. Maybe someone murmurs a joke. You smile faintly. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that, and the day after that. But for now, this moment, this peace, however brief, is yours. Sleep comes slowly, sliding over you like dusk over the fields. In your dreams, you're running barefoot through unplanted soil, the wind in your hair, the sun on your back, no one calling your name, no one counting your hours. Tomorrow, the scythe waits, the earth waits, the endless repetition continues. But tonight, you rest. The monastery is still as the sun rises, its heavy stone walls damp with morning mist. Bells toll softly from a modest tower, their chimes slow and measured, stirring the monks from their pallets and echoing across the enclosed cloister. You're already awake, have been for hours, in fact, your body trained by habit, your mind sharp with the quiet routines of a different kind of servitude. Welcome to religious slavery. When people imagine monasteries, they often picture peaceful silence, solemn prayer, maybe a few robed figures tending gardens or copying sacred texts by candlelight. What they rarely imagine is this: the kitchen slave waking before dawn to stoke the fires for morning gruel, the stable boy scrubbing dung from the floors, the washerwoman dragging linens to the river while the frost still clings to her sleeves. Slavery in monasteries wasn't rare in the medieval world. In fact, it was surprisingly common. Religious institutions held land, wealth, and power, and like their secular counterparts, they needed labor. Sometimes this labor came in the form of pious donations, serfs offering years of service in exchange for spiritual favor. But more often, it came in the form of slaves, people taken in war, bought in markets, or born into bondage. Historians still argue whether this practice clashed with the church's supposed moral high ground. But the reality is that the line between sin and economics was blurrier than a monk's beer after Lent. You, tonight, are one of those souls caught in the contradiction. Your days are structured with monk-like precision. Everything is governed by the divine office, the cycle of prayers that divides the day into regular intervals: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. The monks rise, chant, work, eat, pray, sleep. And you do too in the margins, shadowing their rhythm, cleaning their kitchens, tending their animals, maintaining their grounds. You're not part of their order, but you orbit it, just close enough to feel the gravity, but never quite welcomed into the light. The monastery is quiet, but it's far from serene. Behind those stone walls lies a bustling machine of agricultural planning, manuscript production, hospitality, and spiritual labor. And someone has to turn the wheels. Tonight, that someone is you. Your tasks vary, and none are easy. Maybe you're assigned to the fields, working side by side with lay brothers to cultivate barley or wheat on monastery-owned land. Maybe you're in the kitchens, preparing lentils and root vegetables for a refectory meal served in silence, save for one monk reading aloud from scripture. Maybe you're assisting a monk in the scriptorium, not writing, of course, but fetching ink, cutting quills, illuminating margins with painstaking detail under strict instruction. The work is quiet, yes, but exhausting in its own monastic way. The strangest part, you start to feel a rhythm again. After the chaos of capture, after the march, after the market, after the fields, this ordered life brings a different kind of predictability. Not comfort exactly, but something akin to it. Here, in the shadow of holy men, you aren't beaten or starved most of the time. The monks do not curse or strike, but they also don't see you as fully human. You're a tool, a helper, part of the monastery's divine machinery. And yet, the contradictions of this life bleed through. On Sundays, you help prepare for Mass, watching through the lattice as the abbot blesses bread and wine, speaking of mercy and brotherhood. You wonder quietly if that mercy extends to you. After all, you sleep apart. You eat separately and always less. You are never permitted to join the prayers. You are never allowed into the library. You may carry a crucifix but not own one. You may be baptized but not free. Still, something within you flickers when you hear the chanting. The Latin words echo through the cloister, curling around you like incense smoke. You don't understand most of it, but the melody reaches into your chest and tugs at something ancient. Perhaps this is the trick of religion, how it binds the listener not through logic, but through beauty. You are not a monk, but the music still knows your name. One curious historical detail. In some monasteries, it was believed that caring well for slaves was part of a monk's Christian duty, though interpretations of care varied wildly. Some masters offered food and spiritual instruction. Others offered prayers and little else. There are even records of monks freeing their slaves in moments of spiritual awakening, though this was rare, and often done only on a deathbed, when the soul's balance hung precariously between heaven and something hotter. You think about that as you scrub the stone floors of the nave, your knees aching, your fingers raw. You think about it when the almoner passes you with a nod and a handful of barley bread, muttering a blessing as if it were an apology. You think about it when the bell tolls for vespers and the sky outside darkens into velvet, and the only light comes from within. Historians still debate whether monastic slaves had it better than their secular counterparts. Some argue the structured life, regular food, and rare violence made monasteries a kind of refuge. Others argue the spiritual hypocrisy made it worse, that being surrounded by people preaching love while living on your labor was a cruelty all its own. Tonight, your opinion shifts like sand. Some days you're grateful for the order. Other days, you want to scream at the stone walls until they shatter. Then there's the question of faith. Over time, you begin to wonder, is belief possible under bondage? You've heard enough sermons to recite the basic ideas: original sin, salvation, resurrection. But what does salvation mean to someone who doesn't own their own body? Is heaven a real promise or just another tool for obedience? One evening during Compline, you catch the eye of a monk as he leaves the chapel. He's young, awkward, still growing into his robe. Something in your expression must move him because he lingers. You expect a lecture, maybe a warning. But instead, he offers you a soft, tired smile. Not pity, recognition. "Good night," he says simply in your own language. Just that. And somehow, it feels like a gift. You lie awake that night on your straw mat, thinking about that small moment. You wonder if the monk sees your humanity, if he questions the silence, if he too hears the dissonance between mercy and labor, between scripture and the creak of your wheelbarrow. Your life here continues. There will be more floors to scrub, more fires to tend, more crops to harvest, but also, perhaps, more quiet kindnesses, more strange moments of beauty in the shadow of faith. You are not free, but you are not broken. And in this space between hymns and hardship, between prayer and punishment, you carry something they cannot quite name. Sleep finds you eventually. It always does. In your dreams, bells toll softly. The cloister is empty, and for once you walk its halls not as a servant, but as someone whole. You're called to the workshop just after dawn, the cold still clinging to the stone walls and your breath fogging in the air. The monastery bell is still ringing lauds somewhere in the distance, but your day is beginning in a very different kind of sanctuary. This one smells of hot iron, sawdust, beeswax, and effort. Today, you're not just laboring, you're creating. It turns out you're useful with your hands. You don't remember learning exactly how, but you've always had a feel for things, shaping, fixing, crafting. Maybe it was inherited. Maybe it was survival. Maybe the overseer just noticed you didn't drop the hammer on your foot that one time. Either way, you're now among the skilled. A blacksmith's apprentice, a carpenter's assistant, maybe even a potter's helper. In the medieval world, skill had value, even in slaves. This surprises most modern people. Slavery is often imagined as all drudgery, brute labor, and misery. And yes, there's plenty of that. But in medieval Europe, especially in towns and estates with economic ambition, slaves were sometimes trained in trades. Not out of generosity, of course, but because profit spoke louder than morality. A skilled slave brought more income than an unskilled one, more prestige to a household, and, if well trained, could even pass those skills on to other workers. So here you are, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with oil and dust, working under the close eye of your master craftsman. He's not unkind. He's not warm either. You're somewhere between an apprentice and a tool, useful so long as you don't speak out of turn or break anything valuable. He speaks in short commands, gestures frequently, and sighs in that way that says, "I wish I had two of me, but I'll settle for you." Your tasks vary. Some days you're sharpening tools. Others, you're fitting iron nails into oaken beams for a granary roof. You learn to use a plane, to shape leather, to blow gently into glass. And while your body still aches at the end of the day, it's a different kind of tired, less raw, more precise. Your hands hurt from use, not from punishment. It's a small difference, but you feel it. Historians often point out that skilled slaves had better odds of negotiating for improved living conditions, or, in rare cases, even buying their freedom. Of course, that required cooperation from your master, luck, and usually a payment you couldn't legally own. but the possibility glimmered on the edge of things, enough to stir quiet dreams when you let yourself drift. What no one tells you is how satisfying the work can be. Not the slavery, never the slavery, but the creation. That moment when the rough iron bar becomes a hinge that swings smooth and true. When the cracked board is mended so neatly that no one can tell where it was broken. When the bowl you shaped doesn't just hold water, it gleams. You start to take pride in your work. Quiet pride, secret pride. Because in this life, ownership is complicated. The things you make aren't yours. Your talent isn't yours. Even your time is borrowed. But the feeling, that small internal spark when something turns out just right, that's yours. They can't take that. A quirky little detail you might enjoy. In some parts of medieval Italy and France, skilled slave artisans were lent out to other households, essentially rented by the day or week. The slave owner profited, the client got good craftsmanship, and the slave got to be paraded like a hammer with legs. But it meant you saw the world beyond your master's walls. Sometimes you heard gossip. Sometimes you saw things you weren't meant to see. And sometimes, very rarely, you learned that not all houses were the same. In your case, you haven't left your town yet, but the rumors come to you, news from travelers, whispers from free workers who pass through the workshop, murmurs over shared bread during long afternoons. You hear of cities where people pay for work like yours. You hear about slaves who disappear and somehow don't get caught. You hear about a craftsman in the next town over who freed his assistant out of guilt. That one sounds made up, but you think about it anyway. Your master sometimes shows off your work to visitors. He doesn't give you credit, of course not, but you notice the pride in his voice. "One of mine," he says casually, as if you're a particularly clever horse. But the praise still lands awkwardly like sunlight through a dirty window. It's something, not kindness exactly, but not cruelty either. And sometimes, just sometimes, you get glimpses of the world through the lens of your craft. When a noblewoman requests a new set of carved panels for her chamber, you catch a whiff of imported perfume. When a trader commissions iron hinges for a wagon bound for Venice, he leaves behind tales of a port you'll likely never see. When a passing mason admires your mortise joint and grunts approval, it feels like a medal. Of course, none of this changes your status. You're still a slave. Your future still belongs to someone else. But within that cage, you're carving out small windows. You're learning. And knowledge is sticky. It clings to you even when your hands are tied. One scholarly debate that continues to swirl. Did these skilled slaves develop personal identities rooted in their trades? Or were they always aware that their talents only deepened their chains? Did they find meaning in the work itself? Or was the skill merely another form of exploitation? The answer, as with so many things, lies somewhere in between. Tonight, in your body, in your bones, the answer is simply this. It helps you survive. You have a name here, not your real name, not the one your mother whispered into your ear as a child, but a name the workshop calls you by. It's based on your trade or maybe a mispronounced version of something they half heard. You hate it at first, then you tolerate it. Then, in strange moments, you answer to it without thinking. It's a layer over your real self, not a replacement, just armor. As the sun dips low and the last hammer rings out for the evening, you clean your tools carefully as you were taught. You line them up neatly, brush the filings from the bench, douse the forge, and stretch your aching shoulders. There's pride in the order, in the method, in the simple, quiet claim over something, anything, that feels like yours. You return to your sleeping quarters with soot on your cheeks, the smell of ash and oil still clinging to your sleeves. Others are already settling in, trading scraps of food, stories, or silence. You sit quietly, running a thumb over a tiny splinter in your palm, and for a moment, you allow yourself to imagine. What if I were free? What would I build if the things I made belonged to me? Sleep comes slowly tonight, threaded with visions of glowing iron, polished wood, and things that last. Your body may be owned, but your craft, your hands, your eye, your knowing is your own. And in that, for tonight, there is peace. The chapel is empty, save for a few flickering candles and the heavy scent of incense that seems to cling to the stones like dust. It's late. Too late for services, too late for chores, too late to be anywhere but asleep. Yet here you are, sitting silently in the shadows, listening. Not for voices, not for footsteps, for something else. Whispers. Not from ghosts, though the chapel has plenty of those in its own way. These whispers come from the living, from the halls, the kitchens, the stables, the fields. They travel quietly, passed hand to hand like stolen bread, shared in muttered phrases and meaningful glances. Resistance in this world doesn't always look like torches and swords. More often, it looks like silence. You've begun to notice things. The way certain workers take longer on their tasks than needed. The way someone always seems to distract the overseer just as another slips away for a moment of breath. A tool misplaced here. A door unlatched there. A delivery miscounted. A ledger altered. Alone, each act is nothing, but together they hum. This is the undercurrent of slave resistance in the medieval world, quiet, deliberate, and almost invisible. Historians still argue about how widespread it was. The records are sparse, and medieval chroniclers didn't often waste ink on the grievances of slaves. But the signs are there if you know where to look. A missing harvest here, a stable fire that accidentally spread, a servant who vanished in the night. They tell a story, your story. Tonight, your part in this slow symphony of sabotage begins with something small, a key. You spotted it earlier, hanging carelessly on a nail in the steward's room. It opens one of the side gates, the one that leads into the wooded hills where the pigs graze. It's not a gate to freedom, those don't really exist in your world, but it is a gate to privacy, to planning, to possibility. The key is just hanging there, unwatched, daring you. And so you take it. Not because you're ready to run. You're not yet, but because having it means something. It's a choice, however tiny, wrested back from a world that denies you choices. You keep it hidden, tied into the hem of your tunic, wrapped in a rag, buried under your straw mat. It weighs next to nothing and everything at once. In the days that follow, you start paying more attention to the other slaves and servants around you. You notice who limps because they're truly hurt, and who limps when the overseer passes by. You notice who hoards scraps, who always seems to have a bit of extra thread, who knows which cellar doors creak. You begin to realize you're not the only one listening, watching, weighing. There's the kitchen girl with the burn on her arm, quiet, sharp-eyed, always near the back door. The field hand who carries a knife he shouldn't have and pretends not to. The old woman who mends linens and somehow knows everyone's business. None of you speak openly. You don't have to. The silence between you carries weight. One night, you use the key. You slip out after curfew, your heart hammering so loudly it's a wonder no one hears. The air outside is damp and cool, scented with pine and sheep dung and the lingering smoke of evening fires. You move fast and quiet to the grove beyond the gate, where a hollow in the trees hides you from view. You don't find freedom there, not yet, but you find something else, a meeting. There are others already waiting, huddled close, their breath fogging in the dark. Some you recognize, some you don't. No one greets you. No names are exchanged. You all simply sit, backs against trees or hunched in the brush, and listen to one another. Someone shares a route through the woods. Another talks about a peddler who might offer help if bribed. Someone knows a safe house, a friendly priest, a word to say if caught. It's fragile, dangerous, and real. These are the rebel whispers of the medieval world, not dramatic revolts with banners and battle cries, but slow, simmering networks of quiet resistance. Like vines through stone, patient and persistent. Some slaves fled. Some poisoned their masters' dogs. Some stole small treasures and bartered them for freedom. And some, like you, just needed to know they weren't alone. One peculiar historical note. In parts of medieval Spain and southern Italy, especially during times of religious upheaval, slave uprisings occasionally erupted into full-scale rebellions, burning estates, attacking outposts, fleeing en masse. But more often, it wasn't revolution. It was endurance, delay, disruption. You wouldn't find these stories in illuminated manuscripts. You'd find them in stories whispered by firelight. Over time, your own acts of defiance begin to multiply. You work slowly on purpose, just enough to frustrate, not enough to punish. You hide a stolen tool behind the woodpile. You reroute a water jug so a field goes dry for half a day. Nothing large, nothing heroic. But still, you chip away at the edge of the system, stone by stone. There's risk, of course, always. You've seen others punished for less. The threat of the stalks, of lashes, of worse, hangs over every moment. But that's the thing about living without freedom. Fear becomes a part of you like a sixth sense. It sharpens everything. You learn to walk its edge with care. Some nights you still dream of escape. Not the kind with galloping horses or cloaks and daggers, but slipping away at dawn, vanishing into the woods, finding a quiet place where no one calls you mine. You don't even know what you do there. Plant a garden, maybe. Sleep without counting the hours. Speak your name aloud and have it mean something again. You tell no one your dream, but you carry it, tucked away like the key, wrapped tightly and hidden. It's yours. One night, the girl from the kitchen pulls you aside. Her voice is low, cautious. You took the key, didn't you? You freeze. She doesn't accuse. She nods. Good, she says, and presses something into your hand. A scrap of parchment, folded twice. You don't open it until you're alone. It's a rough sketch. A trail through the hills, a mark by the river. 2 words barely legible. Not yet. It's not a promise. It's not a plan, but it's a sign. Sleep comes slow that night, filled with shadows and the rustling of leaves. You dream of footsteps, of quiet forests, of paths lined with thorns and stars. You wake before dawn, breath held, pulse high, the note still clenched in your hand. The rebellion hasn't come. The chains haven't broken, but something has shifted. And once something shifts, once you know you're not alone, that others feel it too. Nothing is ever quite the same again. You rise before the bell, stretch sore limbs, and prepare for another day of quiet obedience. But now, every task comes with something new. You're still a slave, but you're not only a slave. You're a whisper, a spark, a secret. And in this world, that's the beginning of everything. The bell rings for midday, and the sound echoes off the stone walls with a heavy, resonant clang. You pause your work, sweat glistening on your brow, hands raw from carrying baskets of damp grain. Today's been hot, relentlessly so, and your body aches from the heat and the endless weight of things not your own. But something's different today. Word has spread that a visitor is coming. Not a noble, not a priest, but someone rarer. A merchant with a purse full of coin, a cartload of wares, and, according to whispers, an interest in purchasing laborers. Not many slaves get bought individually. Most are inherited or sold in bulk, like livestock or linens. But this merchant is different. He buys selectively, carefully, personally. Which means there's a chance. Slim, slippery, not even real yet, but still a chance. The excitement among your fellow slaves is subtle, like the hush before a storm. No one dares hope too loudly. After all, being sold doesn't mean freedom. In most cases, it means only a change of scenery, a new set of rules, another pair of eyes watching your every move. But sometimes, rarely, it also means escape. A bribe slipped into the right hand. A wagon door left ajar. A town where no one knows your name. As the merchant arrives, your world tightens. His cart rolls over the packed dirt, wheels creaking beneath bolts of fabric, pots, tools, and somewhere beneath it all, hope. He is middle-aged, sharp-eyed, his clothes fine but dusty. He smiles easily, but there's calculation in it. He is a man who sees everything, values, costs, flaws. His eyes sweep the gathered slaves like a farmer eyeing cabbages. He speaks with your master quietly, their conversation low but intense. Occasionally, he gestures toward your group. You lower your gaze, heart pounding. Are you being measured? Considered? Ignored? Finally, you're called forward. You move carefully, neither too eager nor too slow. You've learned how to walk the line, how to be just noticeable enough. The merchant squints at you, then circles. He asks about your trade, your health, your age. You answer simply, your voice steady. Inside, your heart thuds like a drum. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't frown either. Strong back, he mutters. Skilled hands. You nod. He pauses, then turns to your master. Coins jingle. Agreement is swift. And just like that, you are sold. No goodbyes are exchanged. No fanfare. You're led to the cart, handed a sack with your few possessions, and told to sit quietly among the merchandise. A chicken flaps next to you. A sack of grain leans against your shoulder. Your old life grows smaller as the cart rolls on, and you don't look back. This moment, this transaction, might seem like just another turn of the wheel. But to you, it's everything. It's the possibility of change, of something new. Whether better or worse, you don't yet know. But it's forward motion, and that, in your world, is rare. Historians still debate how often slaves were able to purchase their freedom in medieval Europe. Some records suggest it happened more than we think, especially among skilled laborers or those trusted with managing estate tasks. Others argue it was exceedingly rare, romanticized in later retellings. Tonight, you're not buying your freedom, but the road you're on may lead somewhere near it. The merchant doesn't speak much as he drives the cart down winding country roads. You pass farms, forests, and the occasional shrine nestled beneath old trees. The land feels old, steady, watching. After a time, he pulls off the road and makes camp under a cluster of oaks. You help build a fire, prepare simple food, and then, after the meal, he finally speaks. I've had slaves run, he says, not looking at you. Some made it, some didn't. You don't answer. I don't lock the cart, he adds casually, but I don't chase anyone either. The implication hangs in the night air, soft and sharp as smoke. You nod once, acknowledged, understood. He glances over. You have a name. You hesitate, then give it. Your real name, the one you haven't spoken aloud in weeks, maybe months. He nods, doesn't smile, doesn't repeat it, but he heard it. That night, as you lie beneath the cart with your pack as a pillow, you watch the stars flicker through the branches and wonder what this man wants. Is he kind? Is he calculating? Is he someone who sees slaves as people, or just as investments? You're not sure, but you feel oddly safe, for now. Over the next few days, you travel together from town to town. He sells goods, barters for supplies, collects news. You unload crates, patch holes, cook meals. He doesn't ask much of you, and yet he watches carefully. You begin to sense he's measuring something, your skill, perhaps, or your resolve. In one village, a boy tries to steal from the cart. You catch him, not roughly, but firmly. When the merchant returns and sees the situation, he simply nods and hands the boy a crust of bread. Hungry makes thieves, he mutters. Later that night, he tells you a story about a slave he once bought who escaped within a week, ran into the forest, vanished. Never saw him again, he says. I hope he made it. You wonder if this story is true or if it's bait, something meant to earn your trust. But the way he says it, softly, almost wistfully, makes you believe it might be real. Then one evening, he tells you something else. I don't keep people long, he says. I buy them, I test them, and if they've got enough sense, I give them a choice. You blink. Stay with me, he says. Earn a share, be part of the trade, or leave. Take what you've saved and walk. It sounds like a story, a bedtime tale for the broken, but he says it simply, matter of fact, like offering a bowl of soup. He doesn't ask for an answer, not yet, just lets the words settle. For the next few weeks you wait, work, watch. You wonder if it's a trick, if he's testing your loyalty, if the choice will vanish like morning fog, but he keeps his word. Gives you coins for your work, simple food, a dry place to sleep. And finally, one morning, he turns to you and says, "So, what'll it be?" Freedom, stay, go, serve, escape. The choice, unbelievably, is yours. Historians sometimes write about manumission, the formal act of freeing a slave, often recorded in legal documents or church records. But there were other kinds too. Quiet freedoms, unofficial ones, a handshake instead of a charter, a trail instead of a ceremony. Tonight you choose. Maybe you stay, travel, earn. Maybe you leave, disappear into the hills, find a town where no one knows your face. Maybe you find others like you, build something new. But whatever you choose, it begins with a breath. Your own. Sleep comes easily tonight for the first time in a long while. And in your dreams, you're walking, alone, free, unchained, not towards something, but simply away. And that, for now, is enough. You wake with sunlight spilling across your face, soft, golden, and warm in a way that feels almost personal. It's been weeks now since you left the estate, since the cart rolled away behind that cluster of trees, leaving you with a cloth sack, a few coins, and nothing but the long, dusty road ahead. You've taken cautious steps, always watching behind you, always choosing the quietest routes. And tonight, you're not quite a fugitive anymore, but you're not entirely free either. Because in the medieval world, freedom is never just about escape. You quickly learn that being free and being safe are not the same thing. You're now what they call a freedman, or perhaps more accurately, a nobody. You own nothing, owe no one, and exist in a space between categories. No lord claims you, no parish expects you. In a world built on obligation and hierarchy, that kind of anonymity is suspicious. Freedom, you're discovering, isn't just rare, it's borderline illegal. And that's where the laws come in. You reach a crossroads town with a market and a mill, a chapel and a watchman. It's nothing special, muddy lanes, thatched roofs, chickens where they shouldn't be, but it hums with the complicated dance of medieval commerce. People move in patterns here under rules that are invisible but strict. You're an outsider, and worse, you're unattached. No master, no documents, no proof of your right to walk these roads. Within hours, a reeve stops you. He eyes your patched tunic, your calloused hands, your coin pouch. "Name," he asks. You give it, not your birth name. The new one, the name the merchant called you. From where? You hesitate. Bad idea. Who's your master? You say it, no one. Now he really looks at you. Medieval legal systems were a confusing mess of local customs, church edicts, and royal proclamations. There was no universal slave code like in later centuries, but rules still governed every social interaction. You've stepped into a gray zone, and gray zones attract scrutiny. Historians still argue whether medieval legal systems intentionally made it difficult for freed slaves to survive, or if it was just an accidental side effect of their obsession with structure and status. Either way, tonight, you're about to get a crash course in the law of bondage. You're taken to the manor house on the hill, not in chains, but not quite freely. The local lord sits in a high-backed chair, eating dried figs and barely glancing at you as the reeve explains. You're examined, questioned, tested in 1,000 ways without touching. You stand very still. Eventually, the lord grunts, waves a hand, and says, "Put him on the villain register." Just like that, your freedom ends. Sort of. You're not a slave, technically. You're now a villain, a bonded peasant. It's a lateral move at best. You can't leave the manor without permission. You owe labor. You owe rent. You owe everything except your breath. But on paper, you're free. The absurdity of it sinks in slowly. You escaped slavery only to be conscripted into a form of legal, hereditary semi-slavery. Welcome to medieval logic. You're assigned a strip of land, just enough to grow food for someone else, and told to report to the fields in the morning. You're no longer property, but you're still bound by invisible chains, legal obligations, community expectations, and the ever-present threat of punishment. Still, there are small mercies. You live in your own hut, bare walls, dirt floor, but yours. You till your own soil, and you're allowed to marry, have children, even attend church where the priest reminds you weekly to obey your earthly lords as you would your heavenly one. Thanks, Father. But you learn quickly that the law is flexible if you know how to bend with it. You keep your head down, work hard, and slowly people stop asking where you came from. You become that new lad from the north. You start to belong, not because the law says so, but because people need your labor, and familiarity has a way of smoothing over mystery. Interestingly, in some regions of medieval Europe, villains could actually sue for freedom under certain conditions. If you could prove you lived as a freeman for a year and a day in a town without being challenged, you might be declared free by law. The catch: everyone had to agree to look the other way for 366 days, and that rarely happened. You keep track anyway, quietly. You scratch the days into the post by your door, a new mark each evening, a secret calendar of possibility. You also learn to read other signs, who the reeve favors, when the steward drinks too much, which towns allow strangers to trade without question. Knowledge becomes your shield, your quiet weapon. The law may be against you, but you're learning its blind spots. One fringe detail you overhear at market: some lords, short on cash or desperate for soldiers, have begun granting freedom in exchange for coin or military service. If war breaks out, you might be able to earn your way out of bondage by picking up a sword. The irony stings. Fight for your master, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be free to plow your own field afterward. But war hasn't come yet, and you're still waiting, still counting. The community itself offers a kind of protection. No one loves the Lord. Everyone owes too much, works too hard, bleeds too often. But among each other, there's solidarity. When your roof leaks, neighbors help patch it. When someone's child falls ill, everyone brings broth. When someone dies, the whole village rings the chapel bell, even for those with no kin. That bell might ring for you one day, but not yet. One evening, an old man asks if you have kin. You shrug, far away. He nods. Good, he says, better that way. He doesn't ask again. You sleep that night to the sound of wind in the thatch, and in your dream, the merchant's cart rolls through a sunlit pass. You're not in it. You're walking behind it, quietly, counting days. Morning comes, day 71. You rise. Another mark on the post. Still bound, still watching, but not broken, never broken. Because the law may not see you as fully free, but you do. And that's the start of something the law can't touch. The road beneath your feet shifts subtly. The stones are flatter, more polished, and the air carries a different scent: spices, incense, heat. The village you left behind fades like a memory, replaced by domes, minarets, and olive trees stretching toward a wide blue sky. You're in the southern part of the world now, where the rules feel older and the sun is more certain. Welcome to the Islamic world of the Middle Ages. Here, slavery looks different. Not kinder necessarily, but stranger. Not because the system is absent, but because it's elaborate, detailed, codified, and sometimes deeply contradictory. You've crossed into a region where Arabic is spoken, camels replace oxen, and the call to prayer weaves through city air like silk. You're not alone in noticing the differences. For one thing, there's paperwork. Your arrival at the port, whether by boat or caravan, is logged. You're inspected but not auctioned publicly. Transactions happen more discreetly here, behind closed doors, in courtyards and tiled halls. Your price is still measured by your age, strength, and appearance, but also by your potential. Can you write, cook, sing, tend horses? These things matter here, perhaps even more than brute strength. And then comes the paperwork. Your name, place of origin, whether you are Mamluk, a military slave, Jariya, a female concubine or domestic, or Abd, a general slave. You're labeled, sorted, and assigned. It's impersonal, but efficient. One curious historical fact: in many Islamic societies, slaves had certain legal protections under Sharia law. You could not be arbitrarily killed. Your master was required to feed and clothe you. If he struck you unjustly, you had the right to be freed. And many owners were encouraged, spiritually, morally, even socially, to free slaves as a pious act. That doesn't mean kindness exactly, but it means something. Your new master is a merchant, wealthy, educated, polite. He owns a house in a city that gleams with mosaics and whispers poetry in its sleep. You're assigned work inside, running errands, sweeping tiled floors, feeding pigeons on the rooftop. No chains, no shouting, just routines. Predictable, quiet, oddly livable. It's unsettling at first. You're not sure how to act. You still flinch at loud voices. You still wait for punishment that doesn't come. You've lived too long under harsher hands to trust soft ones. And yet, no one strikes you. No one insults you. They just expect you to do your job and do it well. The household is full of people like you. Some are slaves. Some are servants. Some are freedmen who chose to stay, drawn by stability or obligation. There's a boy from Nubia who sings while he works. A girl from Georgia who can read 3 languages. A eunuch who jokes more than he speaks. Each of them bears invisible stories, and each of them teaches you something new. You learn that freedom, in this world, is both easier and harder to come by. Your master mentions, casually one evening, that he intends to free you within the year if you prove trustworthy. He says it while sipping tea, as if discussing the weather. You nod, outwardly calm. Inside, your heart stumbles. Because it's so close you can almost feel it. And yet, historians still argue whether manumission in Islamic societies was truly altruistic or just socially convenient. Freed slaves often stayed with their masters, became dependents, or even married into households. Freedom, in this world, didn't always mean independence. Sometimes it meant more complicated loyalty. You begin to notice the social structure more clearly. Free people at the top, then high-status slaves like scribes or mamluks, warriors with their own barracks and influence. Then domestic workers. Then field slaves, usually non-Muslims captured in raids. The system is rigid but navigable, and that, in itself, is a strange kind of hope. You also notice something else: race. It's not the central obsession that it becomes in later centuries, but it's present. Fair-skinned slaves from the Caucasus are favored for domestic work. Darker-skinned slaves from Africa are often sent to the fields. No one says this aloud, but everyone knows. You've landed somewhere in the middle, light enough to work indoors, foreign enough to be exotic, skilled enough to be valued. You hate how you benefit from this hierarchy. But you also don't want to go back to what came before. This, too, is a contradiction. Still, you keep working, keep watching, keep learning. One of the freedmen takes a liking to you. He teaches you the alphabet slowly, with dates and a sharp stick in the sand. You learn your first letters in Arabic, not your own language, not Latin, but beautiful in its own right. You trace them in your palm while you work, whisper them to yourself at night. And in learning to write, something opens in you. You begin recording thoughts, quiet ones, fragments, not whole stories, just pieces. The pigeons wait for me. He laughs like water on stone. I want to walk without being watched. These words aren't meant for anyone, but they anchor you. Literacy, you realize, is more than skill, it's armor. It makes you harder to erase. And in this world, erasure is the greatest threat. Eventually, your master brings you to the market, not to sell you, but to help him count cloth. You carry ledgers. You tally bolts. You bargain timidly in broken phrases. The other merchants nod, impressed. You see it in their faces. You're not just a slave, you're useful. And that usefulness is power. Another odd detail: Under Islamic law, a slave who converted to Islam could not be sold again. You already suspected this. But now you see it in action, owners hesitant to sell a newly converted servant. Not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of spiritual backlash, legal complications, or social shame. So you consider it. Not just for freedom, but because you want to understand the prayers whispered around you, the poetry carved into stone, the reason the call to prayer still makes your chest ache. You convert quietly, without ceremony. No one questions it, but things change. People speak to you differently. You are invited to pray at the edge of the group, yes, but there. You are now brother, if not quite equal. You still work, still sleep in the servant quarters, but you have crossed an invisible line. And then, one afternoon, your master hands you a scroll. You unroll it slowly. It's short, formal, sealed. You are free. Just like that. Not with a parade, not with a speech, just ink and paper, a decision made during tea. You stand there, paper trembling in your hand, and wait for something. Applause, joy, collapse, but nothing comes. Just wind through the courtyard and a pigeon fluttering overhead. Freedom, it turns out, is quiet. You are free, legally, spiritually, practically. And yet you stay. Not forever, but for now. Because freedom isn't always about running. Sometimes it's about choosing. And tonight, for the first time, your choice is your own. You sleep beneath the stars, the scroll tucked beneath your head, and dream not of escape, but of direction. Not away, but forward. You wake to the slap of salt air and the creak of a ship's hull beneath your back. The sky above is a slate of morning gray, seagulls squawking as they spiral over a foreign port, and the deck beneath you smells of pitch and fish and long voyages. You sit up slowly, groggy but alert, because you're no longer in the warm halls of the Islamic merchant's home. You're somewhere colder, harder, and very, very Norse. This is the land of the Vikings, but not the helmet-wearing, axe-swinging caricatures you might expect. The truth is stranger, subtler, and far more uncomfortable. You've just entered a world where slaves are called thralls, where honor and hierarchy are tangled like the knots in their fishing nets, and where, yes, slavery is alive and well. The ship that brought you here wasn't a war vessel. It was a trade ship. But that doesn't mean the men aboard are gentle. Vikings were not only raiders, they were traders, settlers, and skilled navigators. And one of their most consistent exports, alongside amber, walrus ivory, and furs, was human beings. People like you. The man who owns you now doesn't look cruel. He looks practical, weathered. He doesn't shout. He doesn't beat. He just expects obedience, and he has the quiet menace of someone who always gets it. His name is Bjorn, and his eyes are the color of deep fjords. He buys you with a strip of silver worn around his wrist and a nod. No fuss, no questions, your property again. But Viking slavery is peculiar. Here, slaves live alongside their masters, eat with them, work with them, sometimes even die with them. You're brought into Bjorn's longhouse, handed a coarse wool tunic, and told to haul water from the well. No cell, no chains, just a life of service where freedom is always just beyond reach, like a boat drifting out to sea. And yet, there are cracks in the walls. In Norse society, being a thrall doesn't necessarily mean permanent captivity. There are stories, real ones of slaves earning or being granted freedom, a good harvest, a show of loyalty, a favor returned. Slavery here isn't always lifelong. And strangely, the line between thrall and free farmer can sometimes blur like fog over a river. You're not hopeful, not exactly, but you're watching. You learn the rhythms of this new world quickly. Mornings begin with firewood and goats. Afternoons bring fishing nets, mud, or hauling stones for repairs. Evenings are firelit, with meat roasting and songs thick with mead. You eat last, speak least, and sleep near the hearth on a fur that isn't yours. But unlike your time in the fields or the manor kitchens, here you're expected to have an opinion on the weather, on the fish, on how best to salt a hide. Bjorn doesn't ask you to think, but he notices when you do. One day, you suggest a better way to stack the fish barrels in the storehouse to keep them from tipping. Bjorn grunts, doesn't praise you, but doesn't ignore it either. Later that week, you notice the barrels have been restacked your way. Historians often highlight this strange feature of Norse slavery. Thralls could earn trust, could hold positions of responsibility, could eventually become freedmen. And once freed, they weren't necessarily social pariahs. They could marry, own land, even rise in rank. There were limits, of course, stigma, but the door existed. It was just rarely unlocked. One fringe tidbit that's always raised eyebrows. A few Norse slaves were buried with honors. In certain graves, archaeologists have found tools, weapons, even small treasures buried alongside former thralls, suggesting that, at least sometimes, freedom came before death, and with it, respect. You're not dead yet, but you're starting to feel something unusual, possibility. The village isn't large. A scattering of longhouses, a smithy, a shrine to the old gods Odin, Freyja, Thor. The villagers are a rough lot, but not cruel. They nod to you when you pass. Some share food, ask questions, trade jokes. They call you Bondi, not quite slave, not quite free. It's teasing, but not unkind. And then there's Solveig. She's a weaver, a widow, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and sharper still with her loom. You help her one afternoon carrying dye pots from the river. She doesn't thank you, just looks you over and says, "You've got good hands, shame they're wasted." You don't reply, but you return the next day. And the next. Over time, she speaks more, tells stories of the old days when her husband was still alive and the winters weren't so bitter. You listen, you carry water. You learn the rhythm of her loom, click, pull, pass, knot. It's hypnotic. One evening, she says, "Bjorn likes you." You shrug. "He might free you." You laugh softly. "Why would he?" "Because he respects work," she says. "And because he's old. And men who are old and tired sometimes like doing the right thing." You're not sure if that's true, but the seed is planted. A few weeks later, Bjorn calls you to the dock. His boat's been damaged in a storm. You help him repair it, fast, clever, precise. When it's done, he squints at you and says, "You're wasted on firewood." You don't know how to respond, so you don't. The next day, he sends you to the blacksmith to apprentice. Just like that. You're still a slave, but now you have tools, skills, a purpose. You shape nails, hinges, rings, you make yourself useful. More useful than anyone else. And then, one gray morning as snow whispers from the mountains, Bjorn hands you a knife. You blink. "Not for work," he says, "to carry." You look at him, stunned. Only freemen carry blades. He grunts, tosses you a cloak, and says, "You're not a thrall anymore. Don't embarrass me." It isn't a formal ceremony. There's no scroll, no declaration. Just a knife and a nod. But you're free. Legally, publicly, socially. The villagers clap your shoulder. Solveig smiles. The smith teaches you a new technique. You walk through the village differently now. You speak more, you eat earlier, you sleep better. You stay. Not forever, but for a time. You build a small hut near the fjord. You carve your name into the doorpost. Your real name, not the ones others gave you. And when the wind comes off the sea, carrying the sharp scent of salt and the distant cry of gulls, you breathe it in deeply. You've earned this air. Historians sometimes argue about whether Norse slavery was better than other systems. It's a flawed question. There's no kind slavery, no gentle oppression. But in this place, in this time, you found something strange and precious. A chance. You take it. Sleep comes easily tonight. With the knife at your side, and the sea singing softly through the stones. Not because you're free now, but because, for the first time, you're also safe. The morning mist drapes the village like a veil, clinging to rooftops and seeping into your clothes as you step out of your modest hut. Birds call softly from the trees, and the lowing of cattle carries from the pasture beyond the stream. It's quiet here still, the kind of silence that only comes when a place has not yet fully woken up. And in that silence, you think of them, your children. You didn't plan on becoming a parent. Few slaves ever did. But life, in its strange and stubborn way, doesn't ask permission. It simply happens, between shared glances, between stolen moments of comfort, between two people reaching for warmth in a cold world. And one day, there it is, a small cry in the night, and suddenly you are more than someone's servant. You are someone's parent. Tonight, you're not alone. The child, your child, is curled under furs beside you, breathing softly, their face scrunched up in sleep, their fingers still curled as if gripping the air. They don't know the world they were born into. Not yet, but you do. And the fear creeps in, what will happen to them? In medieval Europe, slavery didn't always end with the parents. It passed down through bloodlines, like land or debt. A child born to a slave mother was often born into slavery themselves, no matter the father's status. Whether your child belongs to you or to your master depends on laws you never wrote and customs that shift like sand between regions. Historians still debate the exact scope of hereditary slavery in medieval Europe. In some regions, children of slaves became serfs, technically unfree, but with certain legal rights. In others, they were considered outright property, listed alongside oxen and grain. The rules were inconsistent, regional, and quite frankly, terrifying. You've read their face 100 times, memorized every crease, every sound they make in their sleep, and now you watch them, wondering how much of your struggle will become theirs. The mother, your companion, sleeps nearby, one arm stretched protectively around the child. She's strong, sharp-eyed, fiercely independent in ways that probably saved your life more than once. You remember the first time you saw her, back bent in the fields, eyes never leaving the horizon. She'd already been through her own hell, and yet here she was, still standing. You were never officially married. There was no priest, no parchment, no ring. But you share a roof, a fire, a child. In your heart, there's no ambiguity. You love her. And that, in your world, is both a blessing and a risk. Because families, in the world of slavery, are fragile things. One wrong decision by your master, or worse, his heir, and everything could be taken. You've seen it happen. A child sold, a wife reassigned, a brother whipped for asking too many questions. The system wasn't built to protect bonds, it was built to break them. And yet, bonds still form. One curious detail about medieval slave families. Despite the instability, many lords found it economically useful to let slaves form family units. A stable household meant a more stable workforce, and children raised in bondage were already conditioned to accept it. It was a cruel calculus, but one that occasionally worked in your favor, at least until someone decided it no longer did. Still, you don't wait for permission to be a parent. You sing lullabies in your own tongue, the one your mother taught you. You craft toys from leftover wood, teach your child to count using river stones. You tell stories, not of princes or knights, but of clever foxes and brave mice. And always in the back of your mind, you wonder, will they grow up like you? Will they ever taste freedom? As your child begins to walk, talk, and question, the need to protect becomes consuming. You start watching more closely. Who comes near, who speaks too kindly or too coldly, who notices the child's quick wit, the spark in their eyes. Because sometimes, that spark is a danger. Some masters took interest in promising slave children, trained them for specific roles. Scribes, stewards, even soldiers. Others saw cleverness as a threat and stamped it out early. You've seen both, and neither outcome sits easy with you. One day, the child asks, "Why don't we go where we want?" The question hits you like a blow. You kneel beside them, brushing dirt from their cheek, and say the only thing you can. Because the world isn't fair. They nod, not understanding, but they will. You resolve quietly that your child will not grow up in chains. You begin setting things aside, small coins, bits of cloth, food. You trade when you can. You listen for rumors of better places. You weigh every opportunity, every whispered suggestion. Because this child is not just a child, they are a chance. Your companion agrees. She's been saving too. She knows people. She has ideas. She reminds you one night as the fire dies low, "We can't wait for them to free us. We have to find it ourselves." And so you plan, not for escape, at least not yet, but for change, movement, a better master, a new town, an apprenticeship. You look for cracks in the walls of the system, places where your child might slip through and find something more. Interestingly, in some rare cases, children of slaves were granted freedom at birth, particularly if the father was a free man or noble who took an interest. Some even rose to positions of importance. These stories were outliers, of course, but they floated through slave communities like ghost stories wrapped in hope. You cling to those stories. You write your child's name in the dirt every night, a silent promise. You teach them to speak clearly, to watch carefully, to run fast. You teach them to remember where they came from, just in case they ever get the chance to decide where they're going. And still, even in the middle of this hard-edged world, there are soft moments. Watching them laugh as they chase chickens, seeing their mother plait their hair by the fire, hearing them sing nonsense songs in the rain. Moments when the weight lifts. Moments when you believe. Historians often overlook these stories, the small domestic threads woven into the grand tapestry of battles, treaties, and kings. But tonight, here in the quiet of your hut, you know that these threads are what really hold the world together. Because love in captivity is not a weakness. It's resistance. And if you can protect this child long enough, just long enough to get them to safer ground, then maybe the next story will be different. Maybe they'll write it themselves. Sleep comes late tonight. The child dreams beside you, arms flung wide like someone flying. You brush a curl from their forehead, whisper their name, and close your eyes. Tomorrow, the world will be waiting. But tonight, your family is whole. The horn sounds at first light, a long, low note that echoes down the valley, cutting through the morning mist like a blade. You freeze mid-motion, a bucket in hand, the child still curled under furs behind you. The sound isn't one you hear often, but you recognize it instantly. War is coming. You know the signs. You've heard the whispers for days, tensions between rival lords, arguments at market, sudden stockpiling of supplies. The Reeve has been walking the village with an unusual briskness, his boots caked with road dust, his eyes darting too much for comfort. And now the horn, confirming what everyone feared. Levies are being called. And that means slaves too. In times of war, medieval lords didn't hesitate to draw from every corner of their estates, including the unfree. Slaves were expected to support the war effort in whatever way they could, hauling supplies, tending horses, building defenses, even fighting if needed. You've always known it could happen, but you'd hoped, maybe naively, that you'd be overlooked. You're not. The call goes out across the village. Men and boys of fighting age are summoned to the square. You're handed a worn spear and a tattered tunic bearing the crest of your lord. No armor, no training, just a weapon and an order. You kiss your companion quietly, hold your child close, and try not to let them see the fear in your eyes. You tell them it'll be fine, that you'll return, that it's just labor. You lie gently, because that's what you have to do. By midday, you're marching. The roads are crowded, freemen, serfs, and slaves alike, herded together under the watchful eyes of mounted knights. Some wear proper gear. Most do not. You fall in with a group of men you recognize. A carpenter's son, the smith's apprentice, a stable hand with a crooked nose. None of them look ready for battle. All of them look afraid. Historians still debate how often medieval slaves were actually used in combat. Some records suggest they were rarely allowed to bear arms, too risky. Others show they were used when numbers ran thin, especially in desperate skirmishes. Sometimes they were promised freedom in return for their service, though those promises were flexible. You try not to think about that. The camp you arrive at is chaos. Tents thrown up in muddy rows, cookfires smoking, horses snorting nervously in makeshift corrals. You're assigned to a unit with other conscripts, mostly peasants and slaves, all pressed into service by the same vague promise: serve your lord or else. Your commander is a scarred old man with no illusions. He looks you over, grunts, and says, "Try not to die in the first hour." Training is minimal. You learn to hold a shield, thrust a spear, stand in a line. You learn how to march, how to run, how to brace yourself for impact. But you don't really learn how to fight, not the way soldiers do. You're not here to be a knight. You're here to swell the ranks. Fodder. You hear it in the way they talk about you. The meat wall, one noble sneers. Let them take the first arrows. You don't sleep that night. No one does. But still, you wake and you march. The battle itself is chaos, a blur of shouting, hooves, metal, and blood. You don't remember much, only fragments. The whistle of arrows overhead, the crack of bone, the sound of someone screaming your name, maybe it was just the wind. And then it's over. You survive. Somehow. You come to in a field littered with bodies. The sun is setting. A crow hops nearby, indifferent to the dead. Your spear is gone. Your hands are shaking, but you're alive. You stagger back to camp. It's half gone. The banners are still there, but fewer. Some of the lords are dead. Some of the knights, most of the conscripts. And here comes the strange part. Because you survived, fought, even held your line, you're treated differently now. Not warmly, not as an equal, but with a kind of wary respect. Didn't expect that one to last, someone mutters as you pass. Later that night, a squire tosses you a blanket. You did well, he says, for a slave. And just like that, your status shifts. You're still not free, but something has changed. You've seen death. You've survived war. And in a world obsessed with honor and courage, that earns a kind of currency. One fascinating historical note: there are recorded cases of slaves and serfs who fought valiantly in war being granted their freedom. Some were knighted. Some were gifted land. Most weren't. But it happened. Enough to inspire legends, whispered from campfire to campfire. You hear one such story in the days that follow of a man like you, a field slave, who saved his lord's life in battle, was knighted on the spot, now rides with his own banner. You don't believe it, not really, but part of you wants to. The army disbands slowly. The lord's surviving men return home, some carrying trophies, others carrying wounds. You walk the same road, but you're not the same man. You return to your village thinner, older, quieter. Your child runs to you. Your companion stares for a moment before throwing her arms around you. You're home. But home doesn't feel quite the same. People nod at you differently. The reeve doesn't sneer. The steward calls you by name. Someone at the mill hands you bread without asking for coin. The lines haven't disappeared, but they've blurred, just a little. And one day, weeks later, a scroll arrives. You open it slowly. Your lord is granting you freedom. For service, for bravery, for convenience maybe, who knows. But there it is. Your name, written. Free. It doesn't feel real. Not yet, but it will. You sit by the hearth that night, your child on your lap, your companion at your side. You stare into the fire and whisper to yourself, "I survived." And that word, survived, is a kind of victory all its own. You sleep deeply, dreams thick with smoke and steel, and wake not as property, but as a person. Tomorrow, you'll decide what to do with that. But tonight, you rest. You wake before dawn, not because you must, but because old habits die hard. The sky outside your window glows faintly with the promise of morning, and your fingers twitch with the restlessness of someone who's never quite been allowed to stop. But today, for the first time in your life, the labor ahead belongs to you. You are free. And yet the weight of freedom is different from how you imagined it. It doesn't soar like a bird or thunder like a charge. It lingers quietly, like fog along the riverbank, soft, subtle, strangely heavy. Freedom, you're realizing, is work. You step outside your modest cottage, built with your own hands, on a rented patch of land at the edge of the village, and look out over the small plot of soil you've started to call your own. It's not much. A few rows of beans, a stubborn pear tree, 3 hens who hate each other and scream at nothing. But it's yours. And in a world like this, ownership is a miracle. You've started selling what little you grow at the market: eggs, onions, sometimes a bundle of firewood. The coins are small and few, but every one of them feels like a rebellion. No one takes a cut. No one tallies your hours. No one tells you when to sleep, or what to wear, or who you belong to. Historians often portray medieval European economies as slow-moving, stagnant, dominated by lords and kings. But they miss the small, strange truth. Slaves, serfs, and freed people were all part of the engine. Your hands, the same ones that once dug ditches and washed clothes, are now feeding your family and trading goods with neighbors. You've become part of the local economy. You, the once forgotten, the once owned. There's an old woman who buys your eggs regularly. She squints at you each time, as if trying to place you. Didn't you used to? You smile. Yes. She doesn't ask more. Freedom doesn't erase your past. Everyone remembers. Some are kind, some suspicious, a few even resentful. Why should he get land? A man grumbles at market. He earned it, someone else replies. But it's never said to your face, only in passing, in mutters and sideways glances. And frankly, you don't care, because you know something they don't. You understand what it costs to survive, and what it means to rise. That understanding is everywhere now, in the way you teach your child to walk the field rows with their head high, in the way your companion meets your eyes when she hands you the ledger you've both started keeping, in the way you repair your fence with stubborn precision, as if daring the wind to try again. You've started hiring help. Just one person for now, a quiet teenager who lost his parents to the last bad winter. You pay him in food, shelter, and the promise of a skill. You don't call him a servant. You don't call him anything, really. You just teach. Because you know what it's like to be forgotten, and you refuse to let him be. He learns fast. You notice the same hunger in him you once carried, though not for food this time, for purpose, for something his own. One evening, over stew, he asks, "Did you ever work for a lord?" You pause. "I was a slave," you say. The words come out steady, even simple. He doesn't flinch, just nods. "What was it like?" You stir your stew. "Hard," you say, "but it taught me what matters." He doesn't ask more, but he listens closer after that. And that, right there, is the surprising truth about the medieval economy. It wasn't just built on coin and crop. It was built on memory, on relationships, on hard-earned trust and reluctant respect. Which brings you to the lords. Because they haven't forgotten you, either. A messenger arrives one afternoon, muddy and flustered, with a summons. You're to appear at the manor. Not under arrest, nothing like that, but requested. A consultation. You go cautiously. The Lord is younger now. The old one died years ago. This new one is ambitious, sharp-eyed, and fully aware that his estate is struggling. Labor shortages, poor harvests, discontent. He's heard of you, knows you were once a slave, now a landholder, a trader, a man respected in his village. You know how to keep people working, he says, sipping wine he didn't grow. How to keep them obedient. You don't smile. I know how to treat them like people, you reply. He studies you, then offers a deal, manage part of his estate, oversee laborers. In exchange, a larger parcel of land, a formal title, real status. Historians sometimes call these people freedmen lords, former slaves who rose through grit and luck to become landowners, even minor nobility. Rare, yes, but not unheard of, and more common in transitional economies where labor was scarce and profits spoke louder than bloodlines. You ask for time to think. He agrees. That night, you sit with your family, the fire crackling between you, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. It's everything you once dreamed of, and yet, you remember too well what power can do, how easy it is to slip into the same patterns, to become what once hurt you. Your companion speaks first. If you take the land, she says, take the people with you, do it your way, not his. Your child nods. Make it better. So you return to the manor. You accept. But with conditions. You'll hire your own labor, set fair terms, no bondage, no threats, no inheritances of suffering. The Lord laughs at first, but when you show him your growing profits, when the numbers speak, he quiets, nods, agrees. And so begins the next chapter. You're still working the land, still hauling, planting, sweating. But now you set the rules. You pay your workers well, treat them with respect, teach them to read, even if it's just numbers and tally marks. You know it won't change the world overnight, but it changes your world, and theirs. There's still pushback. Other lords grumble. The church raises an eyebrow. One noble even accuses you of spoiling peasants. They're not spoiled, you reply calmly. They're surviving. And survival, as you know better than anyone, is the most radical act of all. Your name is whispered in other villages now, not in fear, but in hope. He was one of us, they say. He remembers. Historians might skip your name in their scrolls. They might call this era the decline of slavery, cite economic shifts, population drops, wars. They won't see you at the heart of it, quietly proving that prophet doesn't need pain. But those you helped, they'll remember. And you. You'll keep building. Because freedom isn't a door you walk through once. It's a field you tend, again and again, with calloused hands and stubborn hope. And tonight, under a sky full of stars, your farm silent, your family sleeping, you whisper the truth to yourself. You are not a survivor anymore. You are a steward. Of land. Of people. Of tomorrow. The floor beneath you is polished marble, so smooth and pristine that you feel nervous stepping on it. A servant has just whispered something in your ear, a command, softly worded but clearly non-negotiable. And now you're moving through a great stone corridor lined with columns and embroidered banners. Everything echoes in here, even your breath. This isn't a manor or a market or a field. This is a palace. And you are a slave again. Not in chains, not in rags. In fact, you look quite presentable, better than you ever imagined a slave could. Your tunic is clean. Your hair has been trimmed. There's even a faint dab of oil at your temples. But all of it is for show. None of it belongs to you. Because in the royal court, appearance is everything, even for those who don't technically count as people. Welcome to the world of courtly slaves. You're not in charge of hauling stones or planting barley now. You are here to serve, to entertain, to blend perfectly into the background of noble life. You fetch goblets. You fill bathtubs. You help guests with their cloaks, sweep the marble floors, fan the noble ladies when they grow warm. Sometimes you carry a tray of fruits so perfect they don't look real. Sometimes you are expected to stand motionless for hours while courtly intrigue swirls around you. But don't mistake this for luxury. Historians often gloss over court slaves in favor of battlefield valor or rural toil. But this branch of servitude was just as restrictive, and sometimes even more psychologically taxing. Because here, your cage is covered in silk. There are others like you, dozens, maybe more. You quickly learn there's a hierarchy even among the unfree. Kitchen slaves, laundry slaves, chambermaids, grooms, jesters. Some have been here for years. A few are even rumored to have the ear of the queen. But always, there is the line, and it does not blur. You learn quickly to read the room, when to smile, when not to speak, when to be seen, when to vanish. The nobles talk around you as if you are furniture, but you hear everything. Every whispered threat, every jealous hiss, every ill-advised joke made after too much wine. One evening, a noble slaps another across the face during a feast. Blood splatters the hem of your tunic. No one notices. Later, you clean the goblets while servants giggle about who will be exiled, who will be married off, who will mysteriously vanish. You say nothing. You keep your face smooth, because information is power, but it's also danger. There's one noble in particular, Count Raymond, gaunt and gold-toothed, who enjoys cornering the younger slaves. He asks them questions about each other, about what they've seen, about who talks in their sleep. You learn very quickly to forget things you haven't forgotten. And yet, court life has its strange rewards. You eat better here, roasted duck, honeyed almonds, bread that's actually soft. You sleep indoors, in a shared chamber with a real straw mattress and a door that shuts. You hear music often, and it's good music. Flutes and lutes and voices so trained they make your bones feel hollow. You've even learned a few dance steps. Not to join in, of course, but to assist, to demonstrate, to teach the visiting noble's child who insists on spinning the wrong way. Occasionally, a visiting guest will mistake you for a servant, a paid one. You smile politely and correct them with as much dignity as you can muster. They never apologize. They just blink slowly, like realizing the vase they admired was made of clay after all. One historical tidbit that surprises many. Some court slaves in medieval Europe were actually educated, trusted with letters, tasked with correspondence, even taught to read and write Latin. It wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of. Sometimes it was a twisted form of grooming, a way to mold a slave into a perfect assistant. Sometimes it was simply practical. Someone had to keep track of the noble's inventory, and parchment couldn't carry itself. You're not that lucky. Not yet, but you're trying. You listen during scroll readings. You linger near the scribes. You memorize the way the letters curve. You trace them later with your finger in spilled wine or ash. It's slow, but it's something. And then, something unexpected happens. You catch the attention of the prince. He's young, bored, fidgety, constantly trying to escape the gaze of his tutors. You're called to him one afternoon to fetch a book he's discarded on the floor. He doesn't look at you, but the next day he asks for you again. Soon you're a fixture in his chamber. He doesn't speak much to you, mostly just points, mutters, yawns. But then one day he asks you to read a line from the book. He wants to make sure you can. You hesitate. Then do it. Slowly, carefully, correctly. He laughs, claps. You read better than my cousin. And just like that, your world shifts again. You're not his tutor, not officially, but you start helping, pointing to words, explaining things, correcting him gently. He listens, even smiles. One evening, he asks where you learned to read. You shrug. He doesn't push, but after that, he treats you differently. He starts calling you by name, starts telling others, fetch him, not just anyone. Some of the other slaves resent this. Others envy it. You just feel uneasy. Because favor is fragile. And nothing in court stays secret. One day, Count Raymond corners you near the stables. "Climbing are we," he says, running a finger along a dagger at his belt. "Careful the ladder doesn't splinter." You nod, say nothing, walk away. That night, you dream of staircases that vanish beneath your feet. Still, the prince's attention protects you for a while. You begin dressing a little better, walking a little taller, speaking a little more. You start imagining things, a future as a royal aide, maybe even freedom. Historians sometimes speak of slaves who were freed by royal decree, granted manumission for years of loyal service or for saving a life. Some even stayed in the court as free advisors or staff. These were exceptions, rare, but not impossible. And now the thought lives in you, flickers behind your eyes whenever the prince smiles, glows faintly in your chest as you recite poems from memory. Until one morning, you're called to the chamber. The prince is gone, sent to a monastery for training, or maybe politics. No one says much. No one looks at you. You're reassigned. Kitchen duty. Just like that. No explanation, no farewell, just reassignment. The ladder didn't splinter. It vanished. You scrub pans for weeks in silence. No one calls you by name. No one asks you to read. No one smiles. But something inside you has changed. Because now you know what you're capable of. You've seen the cracks in the system, the ways it can be bent, the doors that don't lock quite right. You start reading again, secretly, a page here, a line there. You write your name on the back of the pantry wall, small enough not to be seen. And then, one day, a noble visiting from a northern court stops you in the hall. "You," she says, "weren't you the boy who read Latin?" You nod. She raises an eyebrow. "Interesting." The next day, you're gone. Not sold, transferred, loaned, gifted, who knows. But you're in a new court now, a smaller one, quieter, less dangerous, and they need someone who can read. You step into your new chamber, set down the book, and open it to a familiar page. Because this time, you're ready. And this time, you'll write the ending. The wind blows cold through the crumbling walls of the old estate, rattling loose shutters and tugging at the thinning thatch. You pull your cloak tighter, stepping carefully over a patch of broken cobblestone, and pause for a moment to take it all in. The place is falling apart, not from fire, not from war, but from neglect. And that, more than anything, tells you the old world is changing. Slavery, at least the kind you knew, is fading. Not gone, not erased, but crumbling slowly like the manor stones beneath your boots. You've returned here not as a servant or as a fugitive, but as a free man with business. The new lord, barely of age and deeply in debt, has asked for your help managing the estate's accounts. You're not sure if it's irony or karma, but either way, it feels like history curling in on itself. The halls are quiet now. Where once dozens of slaves worked and whispered, now only a handful of laborers remain. Most of the fields lie untended. The granaries are empty, the tapestries moth-eaten. There is wealth here, yes, but no structure, no system, and certainly no unpaid laborers. Because slavery, in this corner of Europe at least, has begun to die. Historians mark this change differently depending on where you look. In England, slavery faded gradually after the Norman conquest, replaced by villeinage and serfdom. In parts of Italy and France, the church's influence chipped away at the idea of owning another Christian. In Scandinavia, the shift came as Christianity took root, outlawing the trade in human souls. And in Central Europe, royal charters and civic reforms began quietly eroding the legal frameworks that supported bondage. But the truth, as always, is more complicated. Because slavery didn't vanish, it evolved. In many places, it was simply rebranded. Serfs remained bound to land. Apprentices were indentured for decades. Paupers were leased to noble families under lifetime contracts. Legal definitions blurred, but the labor and the suffering persisted. Still, something is changing. You can feel it in the way people talk. They say servants now, not slaves. They speak of contracts instead of ownership. Lords talk about retainers and laborers, not thralls or chattel. It's a linguistic sleight of hand, but underneath it is a subtle shift in power. And the markets. They're quieter too. You remember the noise of those early days, the shouting, the bargaining, the brutal efficiency of human commerce. But now, those same markets trade mostly in grain, in hides, in wool. The cages are fewer. The platforms are bare. In some cities, they've been dismantled altogether. One fringe historical tidbit. In 1315, Louis X of France issued a decree declaring that France signifies freedom, and that any slave setting foot on French soil would be freed. It wasn't entirely enforced, and didn't stop colonial slavery later. But in that moment, the idea of liberty started taking root in royal law. The church, too, has started shifting. You walk past a monastery and hear a friar preaching not just about salvation, but about dignity. He speaks against enslavement, particularly of Christians, and warns of damnation for those who hold souls in chains. It's more than rhetoric now. Bishops are writing letters. Councils are debating. Slavery is becoming unfashionable. Not yet unthinkable, but close. The economics have changed too. Lords are finding that paying workers, though distasteful, yields more reliable returns. Cities are rising. Merchants are thriving. Townspeople, once bound to soil or master, are earning coin and buying their way into guilds. Labor is shifting from field to forge, and with it, the systems of control are beginning to buckle. You see it firsthand when a local carpenter, once a villain, buys his freedom outright with coin saved from furniture commissions. The steward balks, but the paperwork is legal, the seal authentic, the exchange final. No one stops him. The man walks past the manor house with his head high, and for the first time, no one tells him to lower it. Still, historians argue whether this decline of slavery was intentional, ideological, or simply practical. Did people begin to see bondage as immoral, or just inefficient? Was it religious reform or economic necessity? You don't pretend to know. But you do know this. Fewer people live in fear, more have choices. And you. You are now one of the people others turn to for advice. Your past, once a mark of shame, has become something else. You've seen every layer of the old system. You understand its pressure points. And in this new world, that makes you valuable. A merchant offers you a partnership. A scribe offers to teach your child Latin. A local councilman asks you to mediate a land dispute. You find yourself standing not in shadows, but at the table. Quietly, competently, undeniably present. You still remember. You remember the cold of the march, the bite of chains, the ache of unpaid labor. You remember names long forgotten by others, faces that blurred into the background of history. You carry them with you. And sometimes, you speak their stories aloud. At the tavern, at the market, in your home with your child on your lap and your companion beside you. You speak their names. You say this was who they were. This is what they survived. Because if this world is going to change, it must remember who built it. And they did. The slaves. The unfree. The forgotten hands that lifted the stones of every cathedral, cleared the fields for every feast, and bore the weight of empires in silence. You speak for them. And your child listens, eyes wide, ears sharp. They will carry the stories forward. One day, they'll say, "My father was a slave. He lived to see the end of it." Not the end of all suffering. Not the end of injustice. But the end of that. And it's enough Tonight, you sit by the fire and listen to the wind press gently against the walls. The house doesn't rattle anymore. The beams are sturdy, the shutters hold, and you know it's not just the building. It's you. You're strong now. And the world, finally, is changing with you. The bell tolls 9 times in the village square, and each note hangs in the crisp morning air like a breath held too long. You pause at the edge of the crowd, your hands folded, your cloak pulled tight against the wind. The people gathered here, peasants, craftsmen, merchants, even a few nobles, stand unusually still, their faces solemn, eyes trained on the wooden scaffold rising in the center. It's not a gallows. It's a podium. And on that podium, for the first time in your memory, stands someone speaking about justice, not for the lords, but for the laborers. You never thought you'd see this. The man's name is Tomas, a former blacksmith turned preacher. He's no one special, really. No title, no inheritance, no royal blood. Just a man who speaks plainly and without fear. Today, he speaks of dignity, of the value of toil, of the sin of treating men like livestock, of the promise of a world not ruled by ownership, but by fairness. The crowd listens, quietly, carefully. You can feel the weight of centuries pressing down on this moment. Because for most of history, especially yours, no one listened. Not to you, not to your kind. But something has shifted, and you're watching it take shape in the square, like smoke curling into a new pattern. This is the dawn of a different kind of movement. Not just survival, not just endurance, but rebellion. It doesn't start with fire. It starts with voices. Whispers first, then sermons, then songs, then speeches. Tomas is one of many. You've heard of others. Women preaching to working mothers. Traveling scribes reading aloud to illiterate peasants. Freemen teaching runaway slaves to forge documents and learn the law. It's not revolution, yet, but it's a spark. Historians still debate whether there were organized resistance networks among former slaves in medieval Europe. Records are scarce, but oral traditions, those run deep. You've heard them, and now you've started passing them on. You stay after the speech, speaking quietly with others in the crowd. Some you know, some you don't. You recognize the look in their eyes, the cautious hope, the tightly guarded fury. You exchange stories, tips, names of people who can be trusted. Later, in a nearby tavern, someone sings a song you haven't heard in years. A slave's song, wordless and low. You hum along without thinking, and when your eyes meet across the firelight, there's recognition. We were there. We survived. Now we speak. Your journey has taken you from bondage to freedom, from silence to voice, and now, unexpectedly, into leadership. It happens gradually, almost without your noticing. People begin asking your advice, seeking your blessing, inviting you to gatherings where bread is broken and plans are whispered. You don't call it a resistance, but it feels like one. There's a woman named Agathe, once a housemaid, now an organizer. She teaches former slaves how to read not just words, but people. She tells them where to stand in the market, how to dress to blend in, how to catch a guard's eye without drawing suspicion. There's a former steward named Willem, who spent years writing letters for his lord, and now teaches others to forge documents, so their papers are always in order. There's a merchant, once enslaved in Genoa, who now moves quietly through towns, passing coins and coded messages sewn into the linings of cloaks. This is not the stuff of noble chronicles. This is the work that lives in the margins of history. And you begin to keep a record. Not on parchment, that's too dangerous. But in song, in carved symbols on walking sticks, in stories told to children by firelight. You say, once there was a man who wore chains, but they did not hold him. You say, the mountain does not remember the name of every storm, but the storm remembers. You say, we were called property, but we knew we were people. One curious historical tidbit you've come across. In parts of the Holy Roman Empire, some freed slaves began carving secret marks into doorframes, symbols of freedom, ownership, remembrance. Not crosses, not family crests, just quiet signs like birds or leaves or closed fists. You begin doing this too. Your own symbol, an open hand, palm up, starts appearing in places no one expects. On the back of an inn sign, etched lightly into a market stall, pressed into the soft bark of a wayside tree. People start noticing. They don't ask. They just nod. And still, the nobles tighten their grip. New taxes, harsh decrees, random arrests. Because they feel it too, that something is slipping, that their authority is being questioned not with weapons, but with ideas. And ideas are much harder to kill. Then, one day, the bishop's men arrive. They're polite, courteous, but insistent. Is it true, they ask, that you were once a slave? You nod. They smile. And now you organize things. You nod again. They glance at each other. We'd like you to come with us, they say. It's not a request. You leave that evening, traveling with a guard escort to a cathedral town you've only ever heard of in stories. Along the way, you pass through villages where people stare openly. Not because they recognize you, but because they're surprised to see someone like you in such company. The cathedral is enormous, cold, full of echo. You're not imprisoned. You're not even locked in. You're interviewed. By monks, scribes, bishops. They ask how you became free, what you've done since, who you've spoken to, what you believe. You answer carefully. Truthfully, mostly. They listen. And after several days, they summon you again. This time, the bishop himself speaks. We believe your experience is important, he says slowly. There are changes coming, movements, reforms. You don't flinch. We think your voice could help guide them. You sit with that. It's not a trap, not yet. It's something stranger. An invitation. They offer you a position as an advisor to a council of reformers. Not official, not public, but present, heard. You return home changed. Not exalted, but watched. Your cottage is quieter now. You travel more, write more, speak less, because the stakes are higher. But the message is the same. We remember. We survived. And now we build. You light a candle that night and whisper the names of those who didn't live to see this moment. Friends, lovers, strangers who shared bread on cold marches. You say their names aloud. And the world listens. Because now, finally, the world has begun to change. And this time, it's listening to you. The road to Rome is long and dusty, lined with shrines, olive groves, and the occasional faded milestone left over from an empire that forgot how to die. You walk it now with slow purpose, not as a prisoner, nor as a runaway, but as an emissary, a voice. You've been summoned not by a lord or a merchant, but by scholars, clergy, people who speak in long sentences and weigh their words like gold. They've heard of your story, of your role in the countryside reforms, of the way your name is passed in whispers among field hands and tradespeople alike. And now, the church wants to speak with you. Not to punish, to learn. It's an odd feeling, being called to Rome not as a soul to be saved, but as a mind to be heard. The city appears slowly, rising like heat from the horizon, domes and towers blooming behind old walls. The streets are uneven, packed with carts and pilgrims, stray dogs and singing children. You pass buildings older than time, carved with angels and stories, their stones worn smooth by centuries of hands and prayers. You stay in a small room behind a convent. A young nun, bright-eyed, brisk, and entirely unimpressed by hierarchy, hands you bread and fish and a place to rest. "They're expecting you at the Lateran," she says. "Don't be late. Cardinals hate waiting." You smile, though your stomach tightens. You've survived war, chains, and hunger, but this is different. You're not sure if this is power, or the beginning of another kind of prison. The meeting is held in a chamber that smells of parchment and incense. High windows let in streaks of gold. Around the table sit men in red and white, cardinals, abbots, archdeacons. Their robes rustle like dry leaves as they turn to face you. They do not bow, but they do not sneer. You speak. Not loudly, not poetically, just plainly. You tell your story. From the first march to the slave market, to the fields, the courts, the war, the child born into uncertainty. You leave out nothing. Not the fear, not the pain, not the tiny hopes you clung to like rope in a flood. They listen. Some take notes, some furrow their brows, some simply stare. One of them, a cardinal with a voice like gravel, finally says, "We've heard rumors, but this is clearer than any charter." He leans forward. "Do you still believe in God?" You meet his eyes. "I believe in people," you say, and sometimes he speaks through them. That earns a pause. And then a quiet nod. You're not here for show, you realize. You're here because the church, bloated, ancient, powerful, knows change is coming, and it wants to control the shape of that change. It's not mercy. It's maintenance. But if they want your truth, you'll give it to them. You speak about doctrine, about what it means to call all souls equal in the eyes of God, while owning some in the eyes of men. You quote scripture, not to shame, but to remind. You ask how a church that sends saints to feed lepers still allows bishops to buy children. Historians still argue whether these councils of the 14th century ever truly debated slavery in moral terms. Officially, the church condemned the enslavement of fellow Christians, but exceptions were made. Non-Christians, different story. Captured in war, justified, born into it, too bad. But now, cracks are forming. A bishop from Castile clears his throat and speaks of Moorish captives. A prior from France shares news of freedmen forming new guilds. A monk from Saxony reads aloud a letter from a dying lord who repented of his slaveholdings and left his wealth to ransom others. You listen, you weigh their words. Then you ask simply, what now? They don't have an answer, but they ask you to stay. For a month, maybe two, help them draft a new document, something to guide monastic orders, something that doesn't quite outlaw slavery, but redefines dignity, encourages humane treatment, sets groundwork. It's not abolition, but it's something. And so you help. You sit in candlelit rooms with men who never worked a field or scrubbed a floor. You teach them the words you learned in dirt and silence. You translate pain into policy. You remind them that words matter, but only if followed by action. You slip in phrases like the laborer has value beyond his yield, and freedom must not be a privilege of inheritance alone. They nod, they edit, they argue. But slowly, surely, a document takes shape. It's signed, sealed, sent to monasteries across Europe, not a law, not a revolution. A seed. One curious historical note. Several actual church councils in the 13th and 14th centuries passed decrees about the treatment of slaves. They didn't end slavery, but they began limiting abuses, declaring the humanity of the enslaved, forbidding certain cruelties. These were not universal, but they planted doubts, questions, expectations. You return home with one of these scrolls tucked under your arm. A souvenir, a symbol. Back in your village, life hasn't stopped. The fields still need tending. Children still cry. The grain still needs to be milled. But when you arrive, something strange happens. People gather, not out of duty, out of respect. They want to hear what you learned, what you said, what you changed. You hold up the scroll. It's not everything, you say, but it's a start. And they cheer. Not wildly, not like a festival, but deeply, with nods, with tight smiles, with a kind of relief that says, we are seen. Finally, we are seen. That night, you sit with your companion under a sky so clear it feels like glass. She places her hand over yours and whispers, "You brought something back." You shake your head. "No," you say, "we all did." Because it wasn't just you. It was every hand that ever lifted a bucket, every back bent beneath a yoke, every story told in the dark, every whisper that kept hope alive long enough for someone to carry it into the light. The church hasn't ended slavery, but it has blinked. And now you push. Because history moves slowly until it doesn't. And tonight, you can almost feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. The forge is hot tonight, glowing with the orange light of coals that crackle like laughter after a long silence. You stand before it, hammer in hand, shaping iron not into weapons, not into chains, but into tools, spades, plow parts, hinges for a barn door. You're no longer just surviving, you're building. This is the part no one tells you about. That after freedom, after you've walked out of the field, stepped off the scaffold, lowered your head for the last time, there's still work to do. Not the work others demand of you, the work you choose. Rebuilding a life, a community, a world. One nail, one beam, one breath at a time. The village has changed. You feel it in the way people greet you now, not with pity or suspicion, but with quiet expectation. You've become a figure, not just a man. Someone who lived the unlivable and came back with something more than scars. People come to you for advice, for stories, for help. And you give it freely. Because this world, this patchwork of lands and fates was built by hands like yours. It always was. You're helping raise a new meeting hall, one of the first of its kind in your region. It's not a church, not a manor. It's a place for free people. Yes, free to gather, to speak, to decide things together. A simple timber structure with a roof that doesn't leak and benches long enough for everyone to sit. The idea came from the guilds. In towns and cities, craftsmen had begun forming unions, groups that protected their members, trained apprentices, shared resources. Some even offered protection from exploitation, and yes, even from re-enslavement. Now, in your little village, you're trying something similar. Not a guild, a circle. You meet once a week in the evenings, by candlelight, with bread and broth and strong tea. Farmers, weavers, a tanner, a blacksmith, 3 women who run the mill, a midwife who knows every child's name. No lords, no clergy, just the people who keep things running. You speak of wages, of roads, of rules. You speak of who gets to speak. And slowly, things change. You organize shared harvests, rotating childcare, collective grain storage, a new well, a school not much more than a room with a slate board and 1 book, but a school. You teach letters, numbers, history. You teach truth. And here's something strange. There's laughter now. Not nervous, not bitter, real laughter. Around the fire, in the fields. Even from the children who have only ever known freedom. It catches you off guard sometimes. That joy. You weren't taught how to carry it. But you learn. One morning, a messenger arrives from the city. A young man, dusty from the road, eyes too serious for his age. He carries a letter sealed in red wax. You break it open with your thumb. It's from one of the churchmen you met in Rome. He writes of changes, quiet but significant, new discussions happening in the councils, debates about expanding the manumission rules, about declaring more classes of forced laborers unlawful. about condemning the sale of Christians across all dioceses. It's not a proclamation, not yet, but it's moving. And he says, almost as an afterthought, that your name was mentioned in the room. Not as a slave, as a witness. You sit with that. You sit with the word witness. Because that's what you've become. Not just someone who lived it, but someone who remembers, and someone who speaks. The next day, you tell the village children about your past. Not with shame, not to frighten them, but so they know, so they never forget. You tell them about the ship, the court, the forge, the market. You tell them about the weight of chains and the strange silence that follows freedom. And then you teach them how to write their names. Because names matter. One curious historical detail. In certain medieval towns, freed slaves were offered a chance to record their new status in public ledgers. They would sign their names, or mark them if they couldn't write, next to the names of their former masters, a symbolic reversal of power. In some places, these documents still survive. Faded ink, crumbling parchment. Proof. You decide to create one of your own. Not official, but meaningful. A book of names. You place it in the hall, beneath the dry rafters and beside the warm hearth. Anyone who was ever enslaved, or whose parents were, or who simply wants to honor someone who was, can write a name, or draw a symbol, or light a candle and sit for a while in silence. You're surprised how many come. A dozen the first week, then more. People you didn't know had a past like yours. People who never told anyone until now. You leave space at the back for stories. And slowly they appear. Scratched in charcoal, written in ink, etched in memory. She carried stones until her hands bled. He sang every night before sleep. They ran together. They made it. And beneath all of it, someone adds your name. You don't know who. You say nothing. But that night, you stare at the flickering page and whisper, "I'm still here." Because you are. Still standing, still building, still choosing what to carry forward. Historians will later argue about when, exactly, slavery ended in Europe. They'll point to edicts, revolutions, legislation. But you know better. It ended the moment someone said no more, and others listened. It ended in kitchens and fields, on roads and riverbanks, in stories and songs, in the act of remembering and refusing to repeat, and in the act of writing your name in a book that no one can burn. You fall asleep that night with your hands stained with ink and soot. The sound of hammering echoes in your dreams, not chains, but tools. You dream of walls rising, of seeds planted, of rooms filled with people who speak. Not because they were given permission, but because no one can stop them now. Rain drizzles softly on the slate roof of your cottage, a slow, rhythmic tapping that mirrors the scratch of your quill across parchment. You sit by candlelight, hunched over the small table you once built with your own hands, now covered in papers, letters, notes, crude maps, and your own scrawled reflections. You're writing a letter again, this one bound for a scholar you've never met. You've started writing to more and more of them lately. Not because you expect replies, but because your story, your truth, deserves to exist in more than memory. You write of the field, the forge, the march, the child, the blade. You write of the soft cruelty of a noble's silence and the sharp relief of a stranger's kindness. You write of the cage made of rules, of the quiet rebellion of dignity, of the long, slow climb toward something like hope. Because someone must. And you've begun to realize that someone is you. Across Europe, in cities and abbeys, scholars are beginning to collect letters like yours. Fragments from the lives of the people who built the world beneath the lords. You've read a few responses. Some are polite, some intrigued, some dismissive. But they're reading. And so you write. You describe the village you helped shape, the people, the little school, the communal hall. You share how some of the children now speak two languages, one from their birth, one from their books. How the blacksmith's daughter learned to recite prayers in Latin, and the miller's son built a spinning wheel from old cart parts. You describe how, once a month, you all gather to read aloud letters from faraway towns, messages from other free folk, other villages, even a few cities where laborers are forming councils. They call them stones, as in the base of a wall. You like that, because you understand foundations. One fringe historical fact you've come across in your correspondence. In the late 14th century, some cities in northern Italy began recording oral histories from former serfs and freed slaves, fearing their knowledge would be lost with their passing. These testimonies, rarely quoted in modern textbooks, provide some of the only first-hand accounts we have from the formerly enslaved. You feel kinship with those lost voices. And you feel urgency. Your hands aren't as steady as they once were. Your eyes blur more often than they should. Time is catching up, as it always does. But you refuse to let your story go quiet. You're working on a book. Not for profit, not even for posterity. For them, the ones who come next. You begin with, I was born to nothing, and became something because I remembered what they tried to make me forget. The pages unfold from there. You write of how your first thoughts were of service, how you came to understand the lie of that, how survival turned to voice, and voice to change. Your child, no longer quite a child, helps you write. They gather notes, check names, smooth parchment when your hands tremble. They've taken up the teaching now, guiding others through the alphabet, through the math of grain and stars. They say, you write the story, I'll make sure it spreads. You smile, aching with pride and something gentler, deeper, a peace you never thought you'd know. The village has grown. There are new houses now, made with better roofs and straighter beams. A baker moved in from the city, a healer who once served at a monastery, even a traveling performer who sings songs about freedom so old and simple they might as well be yours. And the children. They run without fear. They call no one master. That, above all else, is your legacy. But you're still wary, still watchful. You've seen too many changes unravel. Too many moments where progress was mistaken for permanence. So you write safeguards into your book. You write warnings. You describe the subtle signs. When a leader stops listening, when a man starts owning too much land, when the word duty starts sounding like a cage. You write about how systems creep back in through cracks if no one guards the walls. And you end each section with a simple phrase. Remember us. Because that's what history forgets. Not the great wars, not the kings. The hands. The backs. The stories spoken softly to children in kitchens and fields, on stormy nights, by candlelight, like now. You pause to rest your hand and step outside into the rain. It has lightened to a mist now, curling against your skin. You walk slowly through the village, past homes glowing from within, past the hall you helped raise, past the well you dug with others on a spring day no one thought would end. You reach the tree at the edge of the village, the one with the symbols carved deep into its bark. The open hand. Your mark. And beneath it, dozens more now. Marks, names, symbols you never taught but others learned to make. You touch the bark, still damp from rain, and close your eyes. This is not the world you were born into, but it is the world you helped shape. Back inside, you return to the table, relight the candle, and begin again. Let me tell you what we were and what we became. Because you were enslaved, then freed, then remembered. And now you are the memory itself. Sleep comes late, soft and slow, like ink settling on parchment. And somewhere, far from here, another hand begins to write. Because of you, The sky above is wide and cloudless, the kind of clean blue that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. You're standing on a low hill overlooking a field, one foot resting on the edge of a plow. Below you, a half-dozen villagers are planting barley in careful rows, their movements steady and synchronized. It's the start of another season, another year. But something about it feels different. Because you're not just watching, you're overseeing, advising, ensuring that what once belonged to the few now belongs, even in part, to the many. You're not the lord of the land. You're its steward. And the land itself seems to know. What was once owned by a long-dead nobleman, somewhere far removed from the soil's needs or the worker's pain, has been gradually, quietly transferred into communal care. You helped broker the deal. Coins raised, debts paid, documents signed by the reluctant hand of a baron's cousin looking to fund a war somewhere he wouldn't have to fight in. And now, this soil answers to hands that know it. No title, no coat of arms, just shared responsibility and shared gain. Historians often forget these moments, not the sweeping reforms, not the proclamations, but the small, local revolutions. The land sold off, piece by piece, to the people who worked it. The way freedmen pooled coin to buy fields. The way widows negotiated leases. The way ex-slaves formed farming cooperatives in the margins of legal documents no scholar ever bothered to translate. You know, because you were there. You're still there. You've helped draft something you call the Stone Charter, a simple document, hand-copied and signed with thumbprints, that outlines the responsibilities of those who farm the land. It promises no one will be evicted without cause, that harvests are shared fairly, that disputes are settled by vote, not punishment. It's not law exactly, not yet, but it's respected. And that's more than you ever thought paper could do. Today, a new family arrives, recently freed, or perhaps just fled. You're not sure which, and you don't ask. The woman wears the guarded look of someone who's never quite felt safe. Her son watches the fields like they might rise up and bite him. You greet them gently. Show them the water pump, the grain store, the stable. You explain the rules. No masters, no debts owed. Work together, share what you grow. That's it. The woman cries, not loudly, just enough to make you look away and give her time. One curious detail from your recent readings. In some corners of Europe, especially in border towns and trading ports, escaped slaves found protection under what was called customary refuge. Local leaders, seeking new workers, would quietly look the other way in exchange for labor and loyalty. It was never written, but it was understood. You've begun writing it down. Because understanding isn't enough anymore. It needs record, witness, and, more importantly, it needs a future. Back at the hall, your child, now grown, has taken over most of the daily work. They're better at it than you ever were, clearer with words, sharper with numbers, more patient with the stubborn. They host the weekly council meetings now, guide newcomers, teach classes in the schoolroom that was once just an empty storeroom with bad windows and big dreams. And they're writing too. Not stories, not yet. But ledgers, minutes, names. And sometimes they ask you about the old days, about what it meant to kneel, about how it felt to stand up again. You answer carefully, truthfully. You forget how heavy it is, you say, until you stand. And then you realize it was never just your back that was breaking, it was your spirit. They nod. They understand more than they say. That night, you walk together beneath the stars, past the circle of cottages and the lanterns hanging at each door. The air is cool, scented with turned soil and smoke. The village is quiet, settled, like a held breath finally let go. Do you ever think it'll come back? They ask you. You know what they mean. The chains, the whip, the silence. You pause. Only if we forget. you say. And that's why you still write. Your book is nearly done. The pages filled with ink and ash, hope and horror, soil and scripture. You've written about the cost of freedom, not in coin, but in the wounds you carry, the ones on your back and the ones you don't speak of until your voice wavers. You write about the friends you lost, the companions you buried, the ones who didn't make it to this hill, to this village, to this moment. You write their names in gold. Not real gold, of course, but ink so thick and dark it shines in the candlelight. Because they were precious. Because they were the foundation. You've even begun carving a copy of the stone charter into the outer wall of the meeting hall. Not because anyone asked, but because walls last longer than parchment. And because one day, someone will need to remember. Even if the scrolls are burned. Even if the books are lost. Even if no one's left who knew your name. The wall will speak for you. And the field will echo it. You end that day as you often do. Seated beside the fire, companion at your side. The sounds of quiet conversation drifting in from the lane. You watch the flames rise and fall, and feel the warmth not just in your bones, but in the soil, in the sky, in the safety that now lingers like something earned. Because it was. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again, you'll step out into that field, not as a laborer, not as a slave, but as someone who helped shape the world that replaced both. You sit at the edge of the village pond, the surface still and mirror-like, broken only by the occasional ripple of a dragonfly or the silent glide of a frog. The sky above is pale and hazy, like parchment left too close to a flame. You rest your hands on your knees, bones aching in ways you've come to understand as the body's way of remembering things long past. Today is the first day in a long while that no one has come knocking. No questions about the harvest. No visitors with scrolls. No disputes over tools or fences or who left the granary open during last week's rain. You'd almost forgotten what silence felt like. It's a strange thing, growing old in freedom. For so long, you didn't expect to grow old at all. Most slaves didn't. Most didn't get to watch their hair turn white or their hands stiffen from years of purposeful work. Most didn't get to hold their grandchildren or look across land that, while never legally theirs, feels entirely like home. But here you are. Old, yes. But here. You look down at your reflection. The lines on your face. The eyes that have seen too much. The mouth that has learned not to stay quiet. You barely recognize the person you were all those years ago. The child marched from a village. The servant kneeling at court, the field hand whose name was only spoken in commands. You wonder if that version of you would recognize this one. Probably not. And that's okay. You lean back slowly, the grass soft beneath your palms, and close your eyes. The world hums around you, bees in the wildflowers, the occasional cluck of a hen, a distant voice calling for someone to come inside. This is peace. Not dramatic, not perfect, just steady. But as always, memory stirs. You remember the names of those who never got this far. Not just the ones lost to fever or blade, but the ones who stopped hoping. The ones who laughed less and less. Who walked with their heads too low, too long. You remember how they looked at you when you spoke of escape, of freedom, of dignity. Some of them believed. Some didn't. You carry them all. Historians sometimes speak of slavery as a system of labor, an economic model, a social class, but you know better. Slavery wasn't just about work. It was about worth. And it tried to take yours every day. But it didn't win. And now, in your small village, where the children learn to write before they learn to kneel, where fields are shared and stories are sacred, you've helped build something that proves it. One curious fact you learned in a letter from a scholar in Bruges. A few decades from now, it's likely that someone will write about this period not as the end of slavery, but as the birth of new freedoms, That the eroding of old systems will be framed not by their cruelty, but by the supposed mercy of those who dismantled them. It angers you, because you were the one who dismantled it. Not with decrees, but with persistence, with truth, with care. You sit up slowly, knees protesting, and walk back toward the village. The roads are lined with stones now, not cobbled but placed deliberately to mark the way. There's a small shrine at the crossroads, carved by the woodworker's son. It bears no cross, no icon, just a hand, open, palm forward. Your mark. You hadn't asked for it to be there, but someone carved it anyway. Inside the hall, your child, now graying themselves, waves you in with a soft smile. You've been gone a while, they say, setting a bowl of stew on the table. You sit across from them. I was thinking, you say, of the past. You nod, always. They smile knowingly. You've done enough remembering, it's time to rest. But you shake your head. Not yet. Because there's one more project in motion. A larger book, not your story alone, but many. Collected from letters, testimonies, travelers, and neighbors. A book of the unfree who became something else. The forge-born and the field-bound. The kitchen girls who ran, the stable boys who built cities. The slaves who outlived their masters and left behind gardens instead of graves. You're helping compile it. The village scribe, barely past 20, full of questions and ink stains, sits with you once a week, reading aloud what others have sent. One account from a freed woman in Avignon, who now teaches the children of merchants. Another from a man who crossed 3 kingdoms and became a ship's captain under an assumed name. Some are exaggerated, some hard to believe. But that's the point. You believe them anyway, because someone believed you. And when the scribe asks, "What should we call it?" you reply without hesitation. The Book of Becoming. Not the broken, not the free, not the survivors. Becoming. Because that's what you did. That's what you still do. You eat slowly, carefully. Each bite a quiet act of rebellion against the days when you ate only what others gave, when your body was just a tool. Now it's yours. That night, you sit outside again beneath a sky riddled with stars. The village glows softly behind you, lanterns flickering in windows. Someone plays a flute, someone else sings. And for a moment, you forget the weight of history. You forget the years spent proving you were more than a thing. You just are. Alive, at peace, unbowed. You whisper a single word into the night. Still breathing, still building, still becoming. And the wind carries it down the road like a promise. The caravan arrives just after sunrise, a long, winding train of ox carts, mules, and sunburned travelers strung out like beads across the valley. From your perch on the village edge, you see the dust first, rising in a lazy spiral against the sky, before the clatter of wheels and the low murmur of voices reach your ears. You stand and stretch slowly, watching them come, already sensing what this means. Every year now, there are more of them. Not nobles, not soldiers, not the curious wealthy on pilgrimage. These are the wanderers. The disinherited, the displaced, the seekers of something better. And many of them are like you used to be. Runaways, formerly bound, freed or free adjacent. The official terms don't matter anymore. They carry little with them, no coin, few belongings, but stories that spill out in broken Latin, regional dialects, or the ragged silence of someone who spent too long not being heard. Your village, over the years, has become a waypoint. Some pass through, some stay, some build huts, some sleep a few nights in the hall before moving on. But all of them leave behind pieces of their pasts and take a bit of your village with them. You head down the hill to greet them, walking with the deliberate, steady pace of someone who's lived too many lifetimes to rush anymore. The caravan master, a lean woman with cracked hands and sharp eyes, nods in greeting. "Many mouths," she says simply. "Few debts." You smile. "We've handled worse." They stay 3 nights. And in those 3 nights, the village comes alive in a way you haven't seen since last harvest. Children laugh together in mixed languages. One of the travelers mends a loom in the weaver's house. A toothless old man tells riddles to a crowd of teenagers who can't stop giggling. Someone plays a drum by the fire, a deep, earthy rhythm that tugs at something old in your bones. And at night, around the embers, the stories begin. Not read from scrolls, spoken. Of escape. Of defiance. Of things hidden, remembered, survived. You sit close, a quiet presence near the edge of the circle, listening as one man, scarred down his cheek and missing 2 fingers, talks of a nobleman's estate in the east where the slaves rebelled not with blades, but with silence. They stopped working, all at once, and when no one spoke, no one could be punished. He laughs when he says it, a bark of disbelief. You should have seen their faces. A woman beside him shares her tale. She disguised herself as a novice, hid in a convent, memorized the prayers just well enough to fool the abbess. "They thought I was mute," she adds with a grin. I just didn't trust the words yet." Someone asks you to share a story. You consider it. The urge to say "I've told enough" crosses your mind. But then, quietly, you begin. "There was a man," you say, "who carried stones every day for 2 years to build a wall that wasn't his. But every night, he'd take 1 stone back and hide it. After 2 years, he had enough stones to build a bench." Silence. Then someone chuckles. Then a ripple of laughter. "Did that man ever build the wall he wanted?" the old riddler asks. "No," you say. "He built a school." And the fire crackles with approval. The next morning, one of the travelers, a wiry teenager with too many blisters and too few shoes, asks if he can stay. He doesn't say why. He doesn't need to. You bring him to the circle, let him speak, let him vote, let him be. He takes quickly to the fields, learns the forge, begins sketching odd little designs in the dirt, new tools, new ideas. He has the eye of an inventor and the silence of someone who has seen too much too soon. And as you watch him work, you remember yourself. Not the person you are now, the you from the beginning, the you that was owned, bent, almost broken. He reminds you that it's still happening. Elsewhere, always. And that's the hardest part of all this, knowing the system didn't die when you escaped it. It simply found other names, other doors, other masters. But here, you can give people the chance to build new names for themselves. One of the new arrivals, an older woman with a cough that won't quit, brings news from afar. She speaks of a town where a noble has abolished slavery on his lands, trading titles for labor contracts and offering small plots to those who once served. It's imperfect, she says, but it's real. And the message spreads. It reaches ears you wouldn't expect. Soon, your village is hosting messengers, not just migrants. They come with letters, inquiries, even proposals. One local lord asks if you would serve as an advisor. Another, more daring, asks if your counsel might be replicated. You don't answer right away. Instead, you call a meeting. Everyone attends, even the teenagers. You read the letters aloud. Let the people decide. And when they vote to send a delegation, just 3 people, you feel something you haven't in a long time. Trust. Not given. Built. Before they leave, you sit with the delegates and say, don't go to impress them. Go to remind them. They need us more than we need them. One of them, a young woman with a voice like thunder, nods fiercely. We'll carry your stories. And then they're gone. carried not in chains, but on purpose. That evening, you sit again by the pond. The frogs sing. The wind stirs the reeds. The road will keep bringing people. Some broken, some brave, all becoming. And you'll meet them here. Not as savior, not as elder. As someone who simply says, "We remember, you belong." Because that's the last thing slavery ever tried to take. Belonging. And tonight, beneath the stars, your village glows with it. The snow comes early this year, dusting the rooftops and bending the branches in quiet surrender. You watch it fall from your seat near the fire, the windows slightly fogged from the warmth within. The world has turned white and slow, wrapped in a kind of stillness that urges reflection. And you, who have run, twirled, fought, and spoken, are learning what it means to sit. Just sit. Not because there's nothing to do, but because, for the first time in your life, nothing is demanding it of you. Outside, the village moves in soft rhythms. Children chase each other with handfuls of snow. The butcher sharpens his blade in practiced strokes. Someone sings faintly while hanging clothes that won't dry. The forge is quiet today, the embers banked beneath a blanket of ash. Even work here takes a breath in winter. And so do you. You've begun sorting through the pages again, your book nearly complete now. Each chapter holds a season of your life, each line the echo of something once unspeakable. You've included not just your own story, but fragments of others. The testimonies, letters, and oral tales you've gathered now form a tapestry. But you know it's not enough to write it. It must live. So you begin the process of teaching others how to preserve it. You take on 4 apprentices, not to farm or forge or tally, but to remember. To gather stories, to hold them with reverence, to pass them on like seeds. They're young, curious, frustrating at times, and brilliant in ways you envy. You show them how to listen for what's not said, how to write gently, how to handle the sacred weight of another person's truth. One asks, how do we know if we're telling it right? You answer, if it humbles you, you're close. Each evening, the 5 of you sit in the hall beside the fire, copying and editing. One reads aloud. The others debate phrases, question order, clarify timelines. It's slow work, but joyful, because you're not just writing history. You're shaping it. One of the stories that touches them deeply is that of a woman who escaped servitude by learning to brew beer better than her master, Steward. She bribed her way into the guild and ran a tavern for 20 years under a false name, employing only freedwomen. It sounds like a legend, but you believe it. Truth, after all, doesn't always need proof. You send 2 apprentices to travel, one south, one east. Their task is simple: collect stories, teach others to write them down, and return. Or not, it's their choice. They weep when you give them your blessing, because they understand the weight of being entrusted. That same week, a storm rolls in violent, unexpected, thick with ice. Roofs groan, trees fall. Chickens vanish in snowbanks. The road disappears. And then in the night, someone knocks on your door. A boy, no older than 10, barefoot, wrapped in rags, eyes wide and wild. You let him in without a word, feed him, wrap him in blankets, let him sleep. Only the next morning does he speak. My mother told me to find the open hand. It stops you cold. You don't ask questions, you simply nod. He doesn't remember her name, not fully. Just that she worked in the city, in a kitchen with walls that sweated in summer. That one day, she whispered about a place far away, where no one belonged to anyone. She died on the road. And now the boy has arrived. The villagers take him in. They ask nothing. They give him chores, food, a cot in the loft of the baker's home. He follows the apprentices around, mimicking their reading, copying their letters in the mud with a stick. And one day, unprompted, he writes his own name. Not the name he was called. The one he chose. You write it into the book. Under a new chapter you title, The Inheritance. Because that's what this is now. Not a memoir, but a gift. To those who were born long after the chains were broken, but still carry the bruises in blood and silence. To those who never knew the lash, but still flinch when told they should be grateful for their place. To those who walk free in body, but not yet in name. This is for them. And for you, too. For the part of you that never stops remembering. That wakes sometimes in the dark, expecting the whip, the bell, the voice shouting orders. You light a candle and remind yourself. You're not there anymore. And neither are they. One of your apprentices, Lena, asks if she can take the book to the city when it's finished. She wants to copy it into the archives of a new university library. They'll say it's not scholarly, she warns. You smile. They'll read it anyway. Because the truth always finds a way in. Even through library doors. Even through the eyes of a curious student, wondering who the open hand was. You ask her to wait until spring. One last season, one last review. Because when the book goes, it must go whole. That night, you sit alone in the hall after the others leave, the fire low and quiet. You open the book to the first page, trace the lines, hear your younger voice in your head. Then you turn to the last page. Still blank. Waiting. You dip your quill. And write. Let the next voice begin. Because you've said what you needed to say. And the silence that follows is not empty. It's full of new voices rising. And you are finally fully ready to listen. Spring arrives like a long exhale. The last patches of snow melt into the earth, and the roads soften into thick, stubborn mud. Trees bud cautiously, green returning to branches that seem to have sworn off life entirely. You walk the village path with slow, deliberate steps, your knees protesting every uneven stone, but your heart lighter than it has been in years. There's something in the air, more than the scent of thawing soil and the sharp sweetness of new blossoms. A readiness. You stop at the meeting hall, which still leans slightly to the left, despite 2 winters of repairs and 1 earnest argument about whether it's a structural flaw or simply character. The doors are open wide. Inside, the apprentices gather, their voices weaving through the space like birdsong, editing, copying, binding pages with rough linen thread. The book is finished. All of it. Not just your story, but theirs. Not just what you endured, but what you built. Not just history, but future. They've named it simply, The Book of Becoming, just as you said. And it's beautiful. The cover is plain, pressed leather, unadorned save for a small symbol etched in the bottom corner, an open hand. Inside, every page hums with care. Stories of escape, of cunning, of quiet rebellion and noisy joy. Names of those who spoke, those who ran, those who simply endured. It is not a perfect book, but it is a true one. And now it must travel. The apprentices argue gently about who should carry it. Lena insists she should. It was his wish, she says, eyes flicking toward you. But another, Joran, reminds them that Lena is better suited to stay. She knows the script, the ink, the binding. She can train others. In the end, it's the youngest who volunteers. The boy. The one who arrived in winter, ragged and wordless, now standing taller, wrapped in a proper cloak, his eyes calm. I want to see the place where they don't believe we ever lived this way, he says. You nod. And trust him. Because freedom, when passed to the next hands, must come with trust. He leaves 2 days later. The entire village gathers at the edge of the road, offering food, scarves, letters, blessings. He hugs each apprentice. He hugs you last. You kneel slowly, aching all over, and whisper something only he hears. Then he walks into the distance. carrying your legacy not in chains, but on purpose. Back in the hall, the empty chair beside the fire stays empty for days. The others try not to mention it, but you see them glance. You feel the absence. And you feel something else too. Finality. You begin to put things in order. Not because you expect to leave tomorrow, but because life, real life, free life, deserves preparation. You gift your tools to the forge's new apprentice. You pass your herb notes to the midwife. You teach the baker's daughter how to copy names with care. You take your companion's hand each night and say her name aloud like a prayer. Not because you need to, just because you can. And you begin writing one more thing. Not for publication, not for memory. For yourself. It's short. A single page. It reads, I was born into bondage. I walked out. I walked far. I walked toward people who called me human. I walked until I could stand still. And here, I made a place where others could stop walking, too. You fold the page. Slip it into the back of the book's second copy, the one that stays here. Just in case. Because history, like soil, must be seeded more than once to grow. That spring, a young woman arrives from a neighboring village. She's heard of your council, your school, your book. She carries stories of her own. She asks to stay, to learn. She sits in your chair beside the fire. And you let her. Because this place is not yours anymore. It never was, not entirely. It belongs to the voices it protects. The ones that keep arriving. The ones still becoming. And as you sit quietly one morning, the mist curling gently around the trees, you think not about what you've done, but what they will do. And you smile. Because they are not alone anymore. And neither are you. The first copy of the book arrives back from the city 3 weeks later, carried not by your apprentice. He has continued onward, they say, but by a scholar from the university. She's young, all sharp angles and ink-stained fingers, with a voice that skips ahead of itself and a mind that doesn't stop moving. She comes bearing a package wrapped in cloth and sealed in wax, which she presents like it holds the bones of a saint. And in a way, it does. The seal is unbroken. You run your thumb over the smooth red surface before cracking it open. Inside, nestled in linen, is your book, or rather a book. The university's first bound edition, copied carefully, meticulously. Your words, their layout, linen cover, strong stitching. A new foreword written in flowing Latin referring to it as a testimony of the lesser-known lives of the bonded and the free. You snort at the title. Lesser known, as if that makes it sound more academic, more palatable. You're tempted to laugh, but instead you say, it'll do. The scholar grins. You can write your own foreword in the next copy. She tells you the book is being discussed, not ignored, not hidden. There are debates, of course. A bishop protested its inclusion in the main shelves. A noble scholar insisted that no former laborer could write anything of real use to intellectual progress. But others, many others, defended it. Because truth, once printed, becomes difficult to unsee. You invite her to stay. And she does. For weeks. She listens to stories, takes notes, joins council meetings, teaches a few of the children to read Greek, sings badly at festivals, weeps when she hears a woman describe her escape from a salt mine, her story spoken without anger, only weariness. One evening, she asks to speak privately. She tells you her mother was born in bondage, in a city, to a lord who never remembered her name. She was freed through the church, given to a convent, and never spoke of it again. Until she read your book. Then she told her daughter everything. You take a long breath. That's why I wrote it, you say. Not for scholars, not for nobles, but for the daughters of the ones who survived. She leaves at summer's end, promising to make more copies, promising to send others, promising, most importantly, that she will remember. And then life goes on. Because it must. The village expands. A second hall is started. A trade route is negotiated. 2 of the children you once taught have become leaders in neighboring towns, carrying your ideas farther than your feet ever could. And your name. It's never spoken with reverence, only familiarity. You know Old Your Name, the one who built that school. He's the one who knew everyone's name before they knew their own. He carried stories like water, never spilled a drop. There's a small shrine now at the edge of the meeting hall, not religious, just a carved wooden box open at the front with a slate tablet inside. Every season, someone writes a new line. A name. A lesson. A memory. And once a year, the children gather and read them all aloud. You don't ask them to. They just do. You begin sleeping longer, waking later, eating less. But you still walk the village once a day, greeting every person by name, even if it takes you the whole morning. They greet you not like a relic, but like a neighbor. One who stayed. One who kept remembering when others forgot. One who told the truth. That winter, you fall ill. Nothing sharp, just the slow withdrawal of strength. You sit by the fire more often. Let others carry your messages. Your companion, ever patient, ever constant, wraps you in the blanket you both once used to swaddle your child. And you write one final note. Not for the book. Not for the world. For the child you once were. You write. You were always real. Even when they said you were not. You were never less. Even when they said you were nothing. And you have become everything. Even if no one says your name. You fold it. Place it in the stone box. No one sees you do it. But you know it's there. A reminder, a record, a whisper from the beginning to the end. That night, your dreams are filled with running, not away, not toward, but alongside. A long line of people moving forward, faces bright with memory. You see the forge, the fields, the hall, the ship, the road, the open hand carved into every door. You hear voices, yours among them. And then quiet, not empty, peaceful. The bells ring at dawn. Not for morning, not for warning, but for gathering. A soft, steady chime that ripples through the village like a yawn stretching its arms. It's not a sound you hear often, reserved for solstices, new births, and things that deserve to be remembered. Today, it rings for you. You don't hear it, not with your ears anyway, but you feel it, woven into the ground you helped plant, echoed in the door frames you helped raise, hummed in the voices of the people you helped shape. And the people come. Slowly at first, from warm beds and quiet kitchens, blinking at the early sun. Wrapped in cloaks, holding hands, many carrying nothing but the quiet ache of gratitude. No one says the word funeral, because this isn't one. It's a telling, a retelling. They gather in the meeting hall, now expanded to twice its original size, the beams above carved with the symbols you helped collect, open hands, ladders, seed pods, ships, wheels. Along the walls hang pieces of your life, tools worn smooth with use, pages of the book in your careful script, a child's drawing of the forge where you once made nails for roofs that still stand today. The chair by the fire sits empty. A basket of folded notes sits on the seat. One by one, people take a note and read aloud. Not eulogies. Stories. He taught me how to count eggs when I thought I was too dumb to count at all. He didn't say a word, just handed me bread and a place to sleep when I ran from a life that wasn't mine. He once fixed my father's roof with nothing but twine, stubbornness, and a joke about goats I still don't understand. The laughter is soft. The tears are softer. Even those who never met you, children, new settlers, travelers, feel your shape in the room. They've lived among what you left behind. The foundation. Someone reads from your book, not the famous opening, not the grand passages quoted in libraries. A simple line. We kept walking, and then we built. Outside, the tree still stands, bark thick with carvings. Newer ones now, a sunflower, a spiral, a tiny, perfect heart. A small girl approaches it, places a stone at the base, and whispers something. No one asks what. Because it's understood. The village council votes to rename the square, the circle of becoming. No plaque, no statue, just a circle of benches, a fire pit at the center, and a rule written on the inner wall. All voices matter. All names deserve remembering. The scholars from the city arrive 2 days later. One carries a copy of your book bound in red leather, corners gilded. Another brings a painting, crude but heartfelt, of you teaching a child beneath a tree. They ask to include the village in a new lecture series on emergent freedoms. They use words like transformative, proto-democratic, civic memory. The villagers smile politely and keep living. The traveler's path still runs through the village. Some arrive seeking help, others seeking the source of what they've heard. The boy, now grown, though still carrying the same quiet certainty, returns one spring. He brings news of other villages, other councils, other books now being copied and traded, even across borders. He kneels beside your grave, not a stone, but a circle of smooth river rocks with your name carved once, simply, and places a note. He doesn't read it aloud, but he stays a long while. The book continues to spread, not as a sacred text, not as doctrine, as evidence that people like you existed, survived, changed things. In a town far away, a scribe begins writing her own version of the book. She includes her mother's story, her own. She titles it Becoming still. Because it isn't over. It never was. Somewhere, a child is born to a free woman whose grandmother was born a slave. The child will grow up never knowing the crack of a whip or the taste of chains. But they will know your name. They will read your words. They will see your story carved into their world, subtle but enduring. Like tree rings. Like ripples. Like breath. You are not gone. You are not forgotten. You are remembered. And in the remembering, you live. The evening settles like a blanket over the village, warm and worn and woven through with memory. Smoke curls from chimneys, slow and sweet, scented with herbs drying in the rafters and bread baking in shared ovens. The shadows lengthen gently, not with menace, but with ease, like even the dark has learned to rest here. This is the end. But it doesn't feel like one. It feels like twilight, a pause between things. A breath drawn and not quite released. You are not here anymore, not in body, but in every corner your presence lingers. In the way the youngest child holds the writing stick with 2 fingers, because you once showed them that was how to steady their hand. In the song the weaver hums, a lullaby that no one remembers learning, but that everyone sings. In the council's weekly tradition of opening with a moment of silence, not for reverence, but for remembering. You. The open hand symbol is now etched in more than wood. It's worn as pendants, stamped into roof tiles, pressed into loaves during the first harvest festival each year. It's not religious. It's not official. It's familiar. A sign that someone will listen. That dignity lives here. And still, the world turns. Letters arrive from towns you've never seen, from names you never knew, stories of change, slow, stubborn, but real. Freedmen councils forming, apprenticeships replacing servitude, teachers trained not by cathedrals but by memory. They cite your book, not as gospel, but as witness. And slowly, what was once exceptional begins to feel possible. It's normal. A quiet revolution. The children of the village no longer ask what slavery is. They ask why it ever was. They speak of inheritance, of fairness, of the strange idea that no person can be owned, like it's the most obvious truth in the world. You laugh. You probably are, wherever you are. And if you are watching, you'll see it. The harvest circle still drawn in chalk each autumn. The bench by the pond still bearing your initials. The library in the city, now with an entire section titled the Freed Voices Collection. Your name carved into its marble lintel. No statue. Just the open hand. Because you were never about being above others. You were always about making sure everyone stood. Tonight in the village, a storm begins to form in the east. The air thickens, clouds roll in, but no one runs. They bring in the animals, close the shutters, set a kettle on. And in one house, a girl asks to hear the story again. The one about the man who used to carry stones, and how he learned to build. The fire crackles, and someone begins. So now, let's slow it all down. You've walked across centuries tonight, through fields and markets, ships and palaces, war camps and classrooms. You've lived as a slave, as a fugitive, as a builder, a leader, a storyteller. You've carried chains. You've carried fire. And finally, you carried freedom, not just for yourself, but for those who followed. Take a long breath. Let your shoulders settle. Let your jaw unclench. Imagine the world around you now, quiet, calm, safe. A village at night. Lanterns flickering gently behind windows. Earth still warm from the day. The low sounds of animals sleeping, trees swaying slowly under a starlit sky. You are home. Not the home you were taken from. Not the one someone else claimed as theirs. Yours. And in this home, there is no fear. There is no whip, no lock, no command barked in the dark. Just quiet. Just choice. Just you. The life behind you was long and heavy. But the life ahead, even in dreams, it's light. A field ready for planting. A book still waiting to be opened. A road ahead where no one walks alone. So let that last thought soften you. Let the story you've lived settle into your bones. And sleep knowing you didn't just survive history. You rewrote it. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.